You worked in missile defense at NASA, is that right?
Those are two separate things. I worked in missile defense for what initially was called Star Wars, which turned into Ballistic Missile Defense Initiative. And then later, I worked with NASA.
Oh, okay. So how did you get into working with Star Wars?
It was a job. And I worked in what's called a SETA, S-E-T-A. It's Systems Engineering and Technical work. That we were the technical brains of the government, that sort of thing. The government manages the money, and then they hire in technical experts to kind of manage the technology, or to do the technology. So I went there for a job working in, that was back in the middle 80s, 1980s.
Is that Reagan?
Yeah, I think it started with Reagan.
Yeah. And then how did you transition from the Star Wars stuff to NASA?
Well, I worked for about 15 years in the Star Wars arena.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wanted to homeschool my children. And my son was begging me to break him out of jail in school. So
how old?
He was probably maybe 12, 13, something like that. Very bright boy, and he was just bored to death in school and didn't particularly like all the rules that didn't make any sense to him and so on, like boys tend to be. And so I went and talked with his teachers and talked with the school and came to the conclusion that he was right. He needed to be broken out of that particular jail. So I retired and started homeschooling my kids and became a consultant. And that was really the best thing I'd done. I wished I'd done that earlier. It was great because I halved my hours. I only worked 20 hours a week, but I doubled my rate because consultants cost more than regular workers. So the finances were the same. I only was working 20 hours a week. So I'd do that 2 10-hour days. So I had two days at work and 5 days off. And the 2 days I was at work, the kids just had to get along. But if they didn't, they called their mom. They didn't call their dad. So anyway, so then as a consultant, I did different jobs. Consulting's wonderful because you only get the most interesting jobs, because if the people could do it in-house, these are technical companies. If they could do it in-house, they'd do it in-house because it'd be cheaper. So it's only problems that they can't solve themselves that they pull people in that can solve the problem, which means you get to do all the fun work and you don't have to go to staff meetings or any of the junk that, is not a whole lot of fun. So that was a good thing. And one of the businesses that I worked for was NASA. So I worked for them for a couple of years until the task that I had was done. And after that, not too long after that, I took maybe 2 or 3 other jobs that were short, and then I retired the first time.
So what kind of services were you providing NASA?
Well, NASA needed someone to help them with modeling. What I did is I made big physics models of large systems, and then you could tell how that system would behave or what it would do without having to actually build it and spend a whole lot of money. So I was building up systems in the computer. And the problem NASA had that they hired me for was one of understanding what the risks were in a system, doing risk analysis. And there was probably 6 tasks, different risk analysis tasks that were on, and I got handed one, which was probably one of the most fun things that I had done, and that was bird strike. When you have a missile that goes off, a rocket, I was working on the update to the shuttle. I think it was called Ares 1. And before they get out of the atmosphere, they're high, but they're not so high that birds aren't a problem. They're going like Mach 1.5. you have a collision with a 4-pound bird doing Mach 1.5, and that's more energy than you'd get from a cannonball. So it's a really serious problem. As I recall, it was like 7 million pounds of force or something. Yeah, in physics, it's relative. Which one's going fast? If the missile's going real fast and the bird's stationary, it doesn't matter. Right. Whether you had a stationary rocket and a bird going, Mach 1.5, it all's the same. It's all the same. So that was a problem. And one of the things they asked me to do is make a model of that. Make a computer model and tell them what the risk was of hitting a bird and how they could mitigate the risk. And I thought that was wonderful because it was a really hard problem with hundreds of variables that you had to work. Right. And one of the first things I had to tell them was how many, up to the time of when I was doing this, there had been something like 6 or 7 launches that had just failed catastrophically, and they had no reason why. All the telemetry they got said everything was working fine, but they just ended. So they didn't tell me that. That was what they told me after I did the work, but they asked me to compute, given all the launches they had had at that time, what was the probability of how many of them would have hit a bird? And I gave them the exact number of the number of launches that had disappeared without them knowing why. So the model was a good model. It took me about 2 years to put that model together, and it was a lot of fun because it was something that was totally new. Nobody had done that before because it was a hard problem, and I had to learn a whole lot of new things, like what birds fly, at what altitudes, and migration patterns, and where they go, and what times of year, and how many, travel together, and what the probabilities were. And
what a shitty day that would be. Imagine being a bird migrating from South America across Florida, Cape Canaveral, and you just get nuked out of the sky by a missile.
Yeah, but it was pretty catastrophic when that happens because there's a lot of energy transferred. But I had to do the whole thing. The friction, what it hit, where it hit, made a lot of difference. There's all kinds of things stuck onto those rockets. Mm-hmm. They're not like the fast missiles that we talk about in strategic defense. These are big, heavy lift things with big payloads. Right. So they have all kinds of things on them, and it depends on what the bird hits, and all of that is probability. So it was just a huge probability problem with a lot of understanding of the kinematics between a bird and a rocket, going Mach 1, and what it could hit and where it would slide and how long would it be before it disintegrated and what would the bones do as opposed to the flesh, and a big physics problem. But I put that together, and like I say, that was a fun job because it was so different than anything that I'd ever done before.
Mm. And how long did you end up doing that for? Just a couple of years?
Yeah, it took a couple of years to do that, and I wrote it all up, got some accommodations for that because they were having problem at NASA in that time because they had just gone through a funding decrease, which is a political thing, and the way the management solved that funding decrease was to give all of the senior people early outs for retirement. And I think it was like a $25,000 or $35,000 bonus for retiring early and losing nothing by retiring early. So if they had to make 30 years to retire and they only had 25, they'd give them the 5 years, pay them $30,000 and let them retire.
Interesting.
So what happened was they lost all the corporate knowledge that they had. Not all of it, but probably a big chunk of it. Probably about 60% of the corporate knowledge walked out the door in the same year. That was not very smart, but that's what happened, and they had a lot of young guys there who really didn't know what to do or how to do it. So I walked in with my beard, and they said, great, a gray beard, that's just what we need. We need somebody that's old enough to know what's going on here. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was
lots of fishy stuff they let walk out the door at NASA, and how they accidentally lost or deleted all of the data and all of the technology from the Apollo programs. Seems so silly.
Yeah.
Such a big organization that responsible for some of the most incredible achievements in human history.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah, getting rid of all your senior people, all in the same year, just seemed like just a crazy idea to save money. You save money, but you gutted the organization, and it's not surprising that they lost things and kind of didn't know what they were doing for a decade. Then they changed altogether and said NASA no longer designs. Now the design's outsourced. So NASA became the managers of the program, not the actual designers of the program. And that was a big change. Before, all the work was done in-house at NASA, all the basic physics and design work. It was shipped out to industry to actually build. NASA didn't build the materials, but they did design, and now I don't think they do much design at all.
And now SpaceX doing all that.
They manage the money. Yeah, so it's all gone to the private sector.
It's crazy how many SpaceX rockets launch over in Cape Canaveral all the time. Yes. Just random days, like you'd never know. Like a random Tuesday, they could be launching a missile, and you would have no idea. Like what are they launching? What are they doing? What are they sending up into space? It's crazy.
Yeah, well, it's a big demand. The communications these days have everything to do with satellites.
Yeah, and there's like, we found out this number before, Steve, but there's like something, I want to say it's like 30,000 satellites are rotating around the Earth right now.
Yeah, I don't know whether that's a good number or not, but there are a lot.
It looks like a ball, like the planet with like mosquitoes just circling around it. It looks crazy at least in the animations that I've seen.
Yeah.
Well, there it is, 11,000. I was close.
Yeah.
1/3 of what I thought it was.
Yeah.
And then how did you get from doing this stuff to getting involved with parapsychology and the Monroe Institute and Robert Monroe?
Well, actually, my career in physics and my career in consciousness research both started at the same time. When I got out of graduate school, I went to work for it was Army Technical Intelligence, and that's where I started doing big computer models of complex systems, which kind of became my forte. And there, my boss tossed me Journeys Out of the Body. He said, "Tom, read this and tell me what you think about it." So, when your boss tells you to read this, you do it. I did it, and I told him, I said, well, if this is legitimate and this is true, then
keep going.
That's really amazing. If it's not, and the guy's just got a good imagination, well, he's just trying to sell books, that would not be so amazing. So my boss found out that Bob Monroe didn't live that far away, and that was in Charlottesville, Virginia. So we made an appointment. We went out. 2 carloads full of people, about 10 of us, we went out to meet Bob Monroe. And Bob Monroe, this was now 1971, 72, early 70s. So, I'm a lot older than I look. So we met Bob, and he had just built a lab for studying consciousness. It was just an empty building. And he said, "I'm looking for some scientists to help me study consciousness in the lab." So I volunteered, and a friend of mine, Dennis Menerick, volunteered. And about 3 weeks after that, we started going out to the lab, and we were still doing that 7 to 8 years later. So I spent probably 15 to 20 hours a week with Bob Monroe for about 7.5 years.
Doing what? What kind of stuff were you doing?
Well, first off, he taught us how to go out of body. That was the first thing, because we didn't want to study consciousness from outside. We needed to study it from inside. So he taught us, out of body. And that didn't take too long. We learned that to where we could go out of body on demand and when we wanted to, and kind of reproduce the same states. And we then needed to convince ourselves that it was real. I'm a physicist, Dennis is an electrical engineer, and we were not easy to come to the conclusion that it wasn't some kind of mind game. So we did things that were evidential, like remote viewing. you either get it right or you get it wrong. Evidential, we did healing, we did communications, mind to mind, everything we could think of that you could then check to see whether you were actually getting the right answers or whether you weren't. So we did that for years. And I was the physicist, so my job was to come up with the theory. How did it work? Why did it work that way? What were its limitations? What could you do? What couldn't you do? So I kind of wandered off in that space, and Dennis helped build equipment. And if you go to the Monroe Institute, and this was before there was such a thing as the Monroe Institute, Monroe Institute actually happened because of some of the work that Dennis and I did there. So anyway, after the 7 to 8 years, I left town to go to Huntsville, which is called Rocket City. That's where all the missile defense program is done. That's where all the engineering's done. Every aerospace company that you've ever heard of has an office in Huntsville, Alabama.
Really?
Yeah, it's one of those tech cities that it's very, if you go to Huntsville, you will hardly ever find somebody speaking in a southern drawl. Most everybody's has come from someplace else. It's a lot of, actually, this Chamber of Commerce there claims that there's more PhDs per capita in Huntsville than any other place on the planet, but I don't know whether that's true or whether that's hype.
How long has it been like that?
Well, it started with von Braun. Von Braun, when they picked up the rocket scientists in Germany at the end of World War II, those rocket scientists went to Huntsville. So that was where the
paperclip scientists were based in Huntsville?
Paperclip scientists?
Yeah, the Operation Paperclip, where they brought all the Nazis back to the U.S., the top right. Nazi scientists.
Went to Huntsville. Mm-hmm. When that mission to the moon went out, that went out of Marshall Space Flight Center. That's in Huntsville. So Huntsville was the first big missile center. That was the base. All of our missile work is done there. And in the tactical arena, the Army does all its tactical missiles, like TOW and other sorts of tactical things, are all done. Most of the engineering and design is done in Huntsville. So it's a big tech center full of mathematicians and scientists and engineers.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's one of those tech centers, and it's nice actually to be there because it's like an oasis of I don't know, I was going to say smart people, but it's got a lot to it's got a lot to recommend it, because to support all those people, then there's an infrastructure that grows up around it to support. So it's got a big massive civic center, and we get off-Broadway plays, and it's a pretty good cultural center as well.
You probably noticed that mushroom gummies are everywhere right now, in all the gas stations, the vape shops, the head shops, in those wizard packs that promise you enlightenment. The problem is, they're all garbage. Half of them aren't even mushrooms, and they're spiked with chemicals and synthetics that make people sick. And that's giving real medicinal mushrooms a bad name. If you want the real deal, the iconic red and white Amanita muscaria, the national leader is Minnesota Nice Ethnobotanicals. These guys do it right. Their Amanita gummies are made from properly decarbed, lab-tested extract that keeps the full spectrum of natural compounds intact. Safe, reliable, and it actually works. The effect is calm, better sleep, vivid dreams, even a gentle alcohol alternative. They've got gummies, capsules, tinctures, coffee, all clean, all consistent. Minnesota Nice isn't hype. They're building a legitimate Amanita market in the U.S., and I'm proud to have them sponsoring the show. Over 30,000 customers trust them. Christian Rasmussen founded the company after using Amanita to get off benzos, so his company is built on purpose, not profit. Don't play pharmacological roulette at the gas station, people. Get the real thing and save some cash while doing it. Head on over to mnniceethno.com/DJ and use the code DJ22 for 22% off your first order. That's mnniceethno.com/DJ and use the code DJ22. Skip the sketchy gummies and go on a real magic carpet ride with Minnesota Nice Ethnobotanicals today. It's linked down below. Now back to the goddamn show.
I've read so many stories over the past few years about rocket scientists, high level rocket scientists who are so much into this parapsychology, esoteric stuff, like remote viewing and UFOs and psionics, things like this. And it seems so strange to me that people at such a high level in companies like SpaceX or NASA would be into this stuff, which seems like woo-woo to the normal everyday person who's not kind of initiated in it. What do you make of that?
Well, there's probably a good reason for that, and that is if you are in a very highly technical field, you tend to live your life with two aspects. One, you have to have an open mind, because if you're doing research, if you're doing things that are kind of on the leading edge, you can't be closed-minded, or you'll never do anything more than what's already been done. You have to have an open mind that is able to go places nobody's gone before, to copy a line out of Star Trek. Anyway, so you have to be open-minded, and you have to be very logical and rational. And as things come to your attention, you don't tend to say, well, that sounds like nonsense. You tend to say, where are the facts? So you're open, and because you're inquisitive, or you wouldn't be in that field, you have to have an inquisitive mind to be there. You start looking for the facts. Oh, that's very interesting. What's the support? So they start digging into it, and they find that in general that there's a lot there. It's not just, oh, let's just throw that away because it doesn't fit with our belief in physical, reality. Let's see what's there. So that's a mind that's inquiring, a mind that's open, a mind that is looking for facts, answers, that sort of thing. So I think that's kind of natural, that people that have that open-minded but also drive to understand the unknown, that's just another part of the unknown. So they kind of embrace that more easily, perhaps, than just the average person in the street who doesn't really have that attitude of let's go find out, let's read, let's talk to people. So I found that too, that many of the people that are in the more esoteric mind space do tend to be science, engineering people that are
very smart people.
Yeah, people who are smart people.
Yeah, and when you referring to like the everyday people who don't talk or don't have an open mind, or don't, a lot of these people who aren't familiar with this stuff or aren't initiated in it, it's not like they aren't open-minded or they wouldn't be interested in it in the right scenario, but a lot of them are just, they're too busy with their everyday lives and mundane responsibilities of a 9 to 5, living paycheck to paycheck, that kind of stuff. When you live like that, you don't have the luxury to read and talk to tons of interesting people and investigate this type of stuff. Most people are stuck in this crazy 9 to 5 rat race, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, that's true. When I was going out at that time, it was at Whistlefield Farms. It's where Bob lived, and I was going out there at like 6, 7 o'clock at night after dinner, pick up Dennis on my motorcycle. We'd go out. We'd probably work at the lab until 10 or 11. Bob would invite us down to his house. We'd stay down there and chat and talk with him about where we were going and what we were doing. And, that would last until midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning sometimes. And I'd drive home, and I'd get home, 1, 2, 3 in the morning, and I'd practice all the things that I'd just done that evening before at the lab, because when we got to the lab, we'd do work on equipment and that sort of thing, and then we'd get in the booths and we'd start going places and doing things.
In the booths?
Yeah. Bob had, in this place, he had 3 acoustically isolated booths, that soundproof booths, and the one I got in the first one, there was the one between us, and Dennis got in the last one, and mine also was a Faraday cage. It was sheet metal welded all the way around on all sides. And
So no
grounded.
signals can get in or out.
No electromagnetic signals could get in or out, and no acoustic signals either, because they were acoustically isolated. So if Dennis or I screamed as loud as we could, we might have heard a little muffled something in the background, but it was very isolated. So his wasn't a Faraday cage, mine was, and Bob just made it that way so that he could test it. So we'd go get in the booth, and Bob would get in the control room, and then we'd spend the next 2 or 3 hours out of body doing things, talking to people, going places, reporting to him what we were seeing. The way that worked is that he trained us to speak while we were out. So we'd have this microphone hanging from the ceiling about an inch from our lips, and we would tell him what we were experiencing and what was going on. So it's a little parallel processing there. Now, Dennis parallel processed and would speak as he experienced. I would experience, come back and speak, go back and experience, come back and speak. I tended to go back and forth. It was easier for me than to do that. So
interesting.
That was the way that's the way we worked.
And how did this all lead to your big theory of everything?
Well,
how long did that take before you started like that idea? Like, first of all, explain what it is briefly, but then I'm curious how that was sparked in your mind.
Okay, well, let me start with the spark, and then I'll tell you more about it. Like I say, I was a physicist, so I was trying to figure out how it worked and why it worked and what was the science. I knew there was logic behind it because it was repeatable. I could get in the exact same state, change a variable, see how that changed the result. If I changed that variable, was I still just as good at healing or remote viewing or communicating as I was before? Then change the variable a little more. So for the next, I left that part of the world and went to Huntsville, but I kept working at that, and it took me about 33 years of basically doing research in consciousness, changing a variable, see what had happened, change it again, hold that variable still, change another variable, and see what affected what. What was connected, how were they connected, what enabled you to do it, what inhibited you from doing it. So about 33 years worth of that. I thought I understood enough about consciousness to write it down. And that's when I started writing the My Big Toe books. Mainly that was a theory of consciousness, but I also knew that it has to also be a theory of the physical world as well, because one of the things I learned doing this is that consciousness is fundamental and the physical world is not. And I learned that because I could do things within consciousness that changed or affected the physical world.
Right.
But I couldn't do anything in the physical world that actually fundamentally changed consciousness. So the arrow of causality was from consciousness to the physical. So knowing that consciousness was fundamental, then the physical world had to be derivable from the understanding of consciousness and how consciousness worked. And I worked on that problem, and probably about 2 or 3 years after I'd published the My Big Toe books, I got a couple of aha moments, and I was able to derive quantum physics directly. So quantum physics has some big mysteries in it. Why should reality be probability at the bottom level? You drill down into reality. When you get to the bottom, you don't find little particles, you find probability. And also, and these things came out of the double slit experiment, which was 1915 to 1925 is kind of when that was taking place. The other thing they found out was that
this is the observer effect, right?
Yeah, the observer effect, that what the human knew, the information he knew would change what the result of the experiment was. So that was the observer effect. If he knew these facts, then you get one answer from the experiment. If he didn't know those facts, you'd get a different answer. So that said that we were entangled some way with our reality. It wasn't just that, there was this physical reality, and the idea that reality was physical was thrown out because the way you compute things in the physical reality is with probability, not with particles. And the physicists that are the atom smashers, the ones that go to CERN and bang particles into targets or into each other and look at what comes out the other side, they will all tell you, and it's pretty much an accepted idea in physics, that reality is not matter-based, it's information-based. Mm-hmm.
They will tell you that?
Yeah, they will tell you that. Physics, that's a pretty accepted viewpoint in physics, that reality is information-based. Now, they won't go any further than that because they don't know what the next step is. And actually, the founding fathers of quantum physics, which would have been, Bohr and Planck and Schrodinger and Heisenberg, all those guys, and then eventually Einstein came over and joined them as well. They also came to the conclusion that consciousness was fundamental. You get quotes from all of those guys with that as their takeaway from doing the double slit experiment. Consciousness was fundamental. You can dig up a quote of Einstein writing to Bohm, who was a kind of a student co-worker with him, saying that I know that consciousness has to be at the root and has to be fundamental, but I have no idea how to turn that into physics. I have no idea what to do with that.
Right.
So they knew that consciousness was fundamental because that's what the experiment told them.
One of my biggest problems is trying to keep my firearm in reach for myself, but out of reach of my kids. Keeping it in the closet is just too far away. I remember finding my parents' firearm, and I don't want that to happen to my kids. That's what Stopbox USA set out to solve, and they nailed it. They sent me this Stopbox Pro, and I'm not looking back. The customizable 5-button pattern is 100% mechanical and easy to open, and I love not having to fumble around with a combination lock or a stupid finger scanner. And what a relief that it doesn't have to operate off a battery. It's compact enough to stay under my pillow for fast access, and my favorite part is it's safe around the kids. I never have to choose between security and readiness again. I love how well made it is, and when I travel, it slips right into my bag, so I don't have to fumble around with a big bulky Pelican case. And Stopbox is made in the USA, keeping jobs in America. Stopbox is also TSA compliant, so you don't need a separate carry case. They also have a wall mount version and one that's easy access in cars. No longer do you have to trade safety for speed and readiness. And for a limited time, our listeners get 15% off at Stopbox when you use the code DANNY at checkout. So head on over to stopboxusa.com and use the code DANNY for 15% off your entire order. After you purchase, they're going to ask where you heard about them, and please support the show by telling them we sent you.
Well, the crazy thing about physics and consciousness is it doesn't make sense. There's no path to consciousness from dead matter.
Right, but there is a path the other way.
Right.
There is a path from consciousness to physics. So with the physicists, ever since the double split, the physicists have realized there was some paradigm, some shift in the way that you look at reality that would make quantum physics be rational. They call quantum physics just weird science. Nobody will ever understand quantum physics. That was a quote from a Nobel laureate. But anyway, so they were looking for this new paradigm shift that would enable them to understand what happened with the double slit, understand quantum physics. And now it's been 100 years. 2025 was 100 years later. No progress, not even a small step forward in coming up with that paradigm shift. Mm-hmm. Well, I came up with that paradigm shift. I understand that. I can derive quantum physics from consciousness, from an understanding of consciousness. So that is, the big Tao. It's a theory of everything. I found out that not only could I explain quantum physics, but I could explain relativity. The big unknown there is, why is the speed of light a constant? It's always a constant. It can't go slower, it can't go faster, it always goes just the speed of light. Mm-hmm. And if you have a source, like a flashlight, and the flashlight's going, 1/2 the speed of light, and then you turn the flashlight on, you'd expect the light coming out would go faster, would go, 1.5 times the speed of light, but it doesn't. It's invariant to the velocity of the source. It always goes just the speed of light. And that I was able to show logically as well, why that works. And then the neat thing is that once you understand consciousness, you not only can derive the objective world, which is basically physics, You can also derive a scientific model of the subjective world. And then you can understand why some people are happy and some people aren't. You can understand what we're here for. What's the purpose of us being here, and how are we here? And it all falls out logically and scientifically. No assumptions. The only assumption in it is that consciousness exists. Everything else is just logic, and it's science. It also tells you, it informs it makes changes in metaphysics. It answers all the paradoxes in metaphysics. It answers all the paradoxes in physics. Physics has a lot of paradoxes that they know things are like this, but they don't know why. The speed of light and the quantum physics are just two of those. There's a whole bunch of those. It's like I came up with about 35 of them, and this model answers all of those paradoxes. So I guess that's kind of how I got there, is that I worked on it for many, many years trying to understand how consciousness worked, and I worked from the inside. So I could do those things. I could heal. I could, remote view. I could do those and see how they were affected.
What do you mean heal?
Heal. You can use your mind to modify the problem. Well, heal. Somebody's ill. You can heal them with your mind. That's a real thing. You can do that. Matter of fact,
You've done that?
Oh, sure. I've done that many times. Matter of fact, there's a book coming out in the near future that talks about one particular lady that I saved her life a couple of times. She's going to write a book about it from her experience. But yeah, I do that a lot. The way that works is that you have this reality is a computed reality. It's an information-based reality, like the physicists say. So it is a computed reality. And that means it could be a simulation, or it could be a virtual reality. It's computed. It's computed by consciousness. Consciousness is best modeled as an information system.
What's the difference between a simulation and a virtual reality?
Nothing.
Okay.
Really, there's nothing. It's just one seems to sound like science and the other seems to sound like woo-woo.
Yeah.
But they're basically the same thing. So we're kind of getting ahead of the game here, but I'll go ahead and give a little summary of that. So you have consciousness, as I say, is best modeled as an information system. So what are you conscious of? You're conscious of what your five senses pick up, right? You got sight, sound, taste, feel. Okay, you've got all these things, smell. So those are your five senses. If you got rid of that, what would you be aware of? Only one thing, that you exist. That'd be like the Descartes moment. You wouldn't
be like
have
an earthworm.
Yeah, you would just know that you existed. You would be aware that you were aware, and that was all. You wouldn't have any sense data. So what does your consciousness do? It has sensors. It gets input from the sensors. That input then, it has processing. It processes that input. It compares it to inputs you've gotten before, so it has to have memory. And then after it has that memory, it goes back and processes a little more, and then it has output. Okay, what are you going to do about that sense data that you just got? You have to make some kind of choices. That's the output. So what kind of system has input, processing, memory, processing, and output? It's an information system. That's just basically the basic definition of an information system.
Yeah.
So consciousness, you can think of it as an information system.
Right.
Now the second thing is that if you think of an information system, just any generic information system, if all the bits in that information system are random, then by definition there is no information. Okay? All the bits are random. There is no information. So if you order the bits, make some kind of order in the bits, then those ordered bits can stand for something. That particular ordering can be a symbol for something. Could be the number 6, or it could be the letter A, or it could be anything that you want to make it a symbol for. So when you take something random and you order it, you are lowering its entropy.
Right.
Entropy is a measure of disorder.
Right.
So
Thermodynamics.
Second law of thermodynamics says that entropy happens.
Over time, in a closed system.
Over time.
The heat death of the universe is increasing entropy over time.
Yeah. So all systems naturally increase their entropy with time. Everything has a shelf life. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so an information system then evolves by creating information, meaningful information, significant information, at least significant to it. That means it evolves by lowering its entropy. Ordering things creates a lower entropy, creates information. So I'm now just talking about information systems in general. So,
but like, okay, so how is that lowering entropy? For example, like if you have a hard drive, right? Mm-hmm. You have a blank hard drive. It's all ones or it's all zeros when you get it and it's blank. Mm-hmm. And then you add data to the hard drive. Mm-hmm. Then it becomes 11001100111000. Right. Then it becomes high entropy, right? Because that's more chaotic.
No, that's more ordered. Those things aren't just randomly. If all you did is make it random ones and zeros, that would be more chaotic. If you just go into your hard drive and you had some kind of program that randomly put ones and zeros places, that would be chaos. But if those ones and zeros mean something, okay, there's a 1001, and that means the letter A, or that means the number 6, or that means something else. Then that you're creating order. Each one of those pieces of data you put on that hard drive are a very specific, ordered configuration of ones and zeros that have meaning.
But is that higher entropy or lower entropy than all ones or all zeros?
That is lower entropy. All ones and all zeros don't have any information in it. There is no information there.
But there's also no chaos there. It's all purely order. It's all ones, all zeros.
Yeah, you could say, we can say that. We're kind of splitting hairs there. But
no, yes, I know. I'm just confused because I've heard other people explain this analogy to me in this way.
Yeah. Well, yes. If you have all ones, then there's sort of order of the ones. Mm-hmm. You know, if you have it laid out in some big grid, they would be ones everywhere. So there's a certain amount of order there as opposed to random ones and zeros. So yes, if you had random ones and zeros, then you ordered them and made all ones or all ones at this place and all zeros in the next place, then that would lower entropy a little bit, but it would be kind of an insignificant lowering of entropy. It might lower entropy that much. It wouldn't be a very meaningful thing. You know, okay, so all the ones are now on the line. Mm-hmm. So what? You know, what is the significance? What can you do with that? What does that mean? And it really doesn't have a whole lot of meaning. But if you order them in such a way that it is the number system, now you have lots of potential there. You have lots of things. You've defined the number 1 and the number 2 and A, B, C, D and alphabets, and now you can pick language and you can do math. So that is lowering entropy that much. Now you've created a lower entropy because of the meaning, the significance, the capability, the potential of what you've created. That's why the entropy is lower. You know, it's all. I also hear it said another way, where they say, "Okay, you have a bunch of soldiers, and we know war is very high entropy, and all the soldiers are marching in line, and they all move the right foot at the same time. And isn't that low entropy? Yes, it is, but that's low entropy. That's insignificant. Mm-hmm. What's significant about soldiers is that they go out and kill other soldiers, and that's real high entropy.
Right.
So." Yes, you can lower entropy just by putting all your ones in a row, but that lowering of entropy doesn't buy you anything. It doesn't give you much other than the fact that all your ones are in a row.
Right.
So what's important about the entropy that I'm talking about here is the significance, the meaning, the potentiality of it. What can it do? Now, there's two ways of looking at entropy. One is just the order and disorder that we talked about. Mm-hmm. There's another equal expression of it is you look at the system and say, how much work can the system do? What can the system do? What can it perform? Okay, so you have a bottle of gasoline, and as long as all the molecules of gasoline are in the bottle, you can put a fuse on it and throw it like a Molotov cocktail, and it'll make a big bang. There's a lot of energy that's released. But if you just leave the cap off for a few months and all the gasoline molecules go out and, okay, now disorder, right? They were ordered all in the jug. Now they're all disordered.
Right.
But how much work can it do? Nothing. It no longer has the ability to do work. So this thing of the ability to accomplish something is also another description of entropy, not just order and disorder, but
right.
What is its ability to do something? And when you have, say, numbers and alphabets, that gives you an ability to do something much greater. Mm-hmm. So the entropy there is much lower. So anyway, so we have consciousness as an information system. Consciousness evolves, moves forward by creating more useful information. And if you let that progress for a while, you'll find that eventually it kind of plateaus out. It's making, it's making patterns and patterns of patterns and so on. And then it takes two of its elements and goes back and forth between a 1 and a 0, and now it has regular time. So now it can make sequence of patterns. But eventually it tops out. And when it tops out, what can it do to create more novelty, more space in which to evolve into? And what it does is the same things our cell does. It takes a piece of itself with all the capabilities of itself, but a small piece, and it gives that small piece free will. So it takes, now you have the big monolithic consciousness that kind of plateaued out, but now you have another piece that has free will. Mm-hmm. And now you have maybe thousands or tens of thousands of pieces that have free will. Mm-hmm. And that's what you and I are. We're pieces of consciousness. So I call these individuated unit of consciousness. And now you've created a social system, okay? And they have free will. So with free will, you have the possibility of an argument. You have a possibility of different points of view. And suddenly there's more possibilities that you can move into. All the pieces can work together to come up with something more than any one of them would be able to produce on their own. So that is the way consciousness evolved. And I can make an argument, but I won't go through the details, but it's a logical path to say that once you have a social system, then, and what you're trying to do is lower entropy, you lower entropy in a social system through cooperation, working together, okay, caring. You raise entropy in a social system by, refusing to work together, by being self-centered. It's all about me. And that then splits off into what I call the love side and the fear side. Mm-hmm. So consciousness is evolving toward the love side, the becoming love, cooperation. That is positive evolution. On the fear side, if you're fearful, you don't trust. If you don't trust, you don't cooperate. If it's the negative side. Mm-hmm. The fear is self-destructive.
Right.
So we could get into more detail, but I won't go there now. It's fairly obvious that that's the case. So then we come to the amazing idea that consciousness is evolving toward cooperation, the caring, the love side, and that the individuated units of consciousness, that's what really you and I are, that our job is to make choices in which we express the cooperation and the caring and the love, because that helps us lower our entropy. And as we lower our entropy, the whole system entropy lowers, because we're just a piece of it. We're just subsets. Virtual machines inside a bigger machine, if you want a computer metaphor. Right. So that's the overall thing. Now, if you understand that, then that matches real well with the physicist saying that reality is information-based. Okay? Because these individuated units of consciousness now are supposed to make good choices, but basically what they've got is like a big chat room, right? They communicate with each other. The first virtual reality is just communication protocols. A virtual reality is just defined by a rule set. Here's the rules. If you're going to be part of this virtual reality, you have to abide by these rules. Well, so they could all communicate, but that's a very slow process of growing up just by communicating. So the system says I need to make another virtual reality where there's more meaningful interaction, not just communication, but where there is more significant issues and significant problems. So what it does is it gets a rule set together, just like you had a rule set for the communications. It gets a rule set. It gets initial conditions, which are ball of plasma, very high temperature, very high pressure. Now we're talking big digital bang. The rule set's what we call science and physics. So it pushes a run button, and the ball of plasma expands, cools, does what it does according to the rules. And it goes just a little bit and it bombs because the rule set isn't perfect yet and the initial conditions aren't perfect yet, so the system changes it. Big digital bang, take two, and so on. So the actual rule set and the initial conditions over thousands of iterations of this gets to be tuned to give you a more stable, longer thing. And that's why we have this thing called the anthropic cosmological principle. You've probably heard of that scientists have come up with this knowledge that there's a whole set, I think it's like 7, 8, 9 different variables that all have to be tuned to each other to like 8 decimal places. And if you don't have that, if you don't have all those conditions, then life is impossible. We wouldn't be here.
Right.
That's called the anthropic principle because it makes it sound like the universe was built just for us, because it's just this perfect way that would allow life to be, to exist here. And the problem that physics has with that is that they have this idea that evolution is always run by random processes. You have a random process. Something just happens, and if it's a good thing, it continues. If it's a bad thing, it goes away. And they're all random processes. But you can't get 7 or 8 things tuned to each other to 8 decimal places randomly. The probability of that is close to 0. So that leaves, How did that get organized? How did that happen? Well, this big digital bang, take 1, take 2, take 100,000. That's the process that created that, those kind of processes. So then what this leads us to then is that this virtual reality evolved. It wasn't programmed. It evolved. Just like the physicists say from the Big Bang. It evolved, except it did that in the computer. The computer was just a subset of this larger consciousness system that I call it, that configured itself as a computer. It's an information system. It can configure part of itself as a computer. It's done math. It's learned all those things as it evolved, like you would think that it would. So I'm skipping a lot of steps here, but that I'm just getting to the very end point. That makes this physical reality a virtual reality, an entropy reduction trainer for individuated units of consciousness. And here we are. We're a piece of consciousness playing a human avatar. That human avatar has evolved from this big digital bang with a rule set we call science. That's what scientists do. They try to figure out what the rules are, and with initial conditions. So then this supports the thesis that this is a virtual reality. But unlike other people who have that thesis, mine is it's a virtual reality computed by consciousness as an entropy reduction trainer for consciousness, because that helps the whole system evolve toward love. So that comes out to be pretty sweet. I didn't expect any of that. All of this was done logically, one step at a time, and actually it surprised me a lot as it came together, the logic of it. This is not logic that says, well, this could happen. This is logic that says this must happen. It has to develop this way. So it's not a justification of possibility. It's good science. It's fact-based.
Life can get hectic, and the one thing that helps me calm down and unwind is Cornbread Hemp's CBD gummies. Sometimes I don't want to be blitzed, and Cornbread's gummies are like a backdoor to relief without the mental effects. I usually take one of these when I feel stressed and I can't sleep, and I just wait for the calmness to wash over my brain. Cornbread Hemp uses the best part of the hemp plant, the flower, for the purest potent CBD. They curate effects that specifically help with stress and discomfort, and I find the results to be remarkably effective. They also have formulas for sleeplessness too. There's no fillers or junk, just full spectrum goodness. They've made CBD their specialty. My favorite is the berry flavor, but they have several flavors, including capsules if you don't want the sugar. Their products are third-party tested and USDA organic to ensure safety and purity. If you encounter stress like me, then try out Cornbread CBD and you can thank me later. And for a limited time, they're offering you lucky listeners 30% off your first order. Don't miss out on this. Just go to cornbreadhemp.com/Danny and use the code Danny at checkout. That's cornbreadhemp.com/DANNY with code Danny to get 30% off your first order. And thank you to Cornbread Hemp for sponsoring this episode.
So do you think that there are other parallel information systems or
yes.
computations or
Sure. Yeah,
or is there a base physical, do you think a physical world does exist somewhere?
No, there is no such thing as a physical world. There's no such thing as physical. It's all just information.
Right, everything.
Everything is
so there's no if you think of some people who imagine simulation theory, they imagine that there's some physical base reality somewhere.
Right, they do, and I reject that. There is none. That does not make good sense to me, that it's like that. It's all information. Are there other virtual realities beside this one? Yes, of course. I've been to probably 6 or 7 of them. So you can travel. Once you are able to travel around in consciousness, then you can see the bigger picture more easily. So there are these other realities. And the rule sets, some of them are a very tight rule set, like this one, which makes, every energy exchange is what required by the rules. It's very detailed. And then there's other virtual realities, like when you dream. That's another virtual reality, but it's not that buttoned down. The rule set's very loose. You can fly, you can teleport, you can do all kinds of things in dreams that you can't do here because you have a virtual reality that doesn't have this tight rule set. But there are other virtual realities that do have tight rule sets, and they're very physical-like. And you can visit them in multiple ways. You can visit them by just connecting mentally to the characters so you can kind of hear what they're saying. And you can visit them by actually getting, if you have a good working relationship with a larger conscious system, you can actually get insinuated into their data stream so that now you're physical, quote unphysical, in that particular virtual reality. And you can do that as well, but you can't do that on your own.
You're talking about like dreams or altered states of consciousness through meditation or through psychedelics, things like this?
Yes, but I would say don't go through psychedelics. That will get you there, but it gets you there without the knowledge and experience to really know what you're doing. In other words, yes, drugs do put you into what I would call the larger reality. It's not that they put you in just imaginary space. It's real, what you get for these drugs. But it's like being shot up in a bottle rocket. Oh, you go up, you're there, and then you crash.
Right.
It's not, if you anything that you can do on a psychedelic, you can do much better without it.
Really?
Yes, you can do it much better, much more fully. You can experience much more in depth. It's not just a flash that you pass through. It's a thing that you learn. You go there, you learn what's going on, you interact, you become part of that thing. You're not just being shot through an experience. You're actually connected in that reality frame. You can go there and
stay there.
And stay there as long as you want to stay there. Time is very different in different reality frames.
Have you ever tried psychedelics?
No, I don't take psychedelics because my consciousness is very precious to me, and I don't want to pollute it with that. So I didn't. But I've talked to lots of people who do, and they've explained their trips and what they've learned and whatever. And all of it is places I've already been. But I've been there in a controlled way where I can understand what's going on. If I don't understand, I can ask the questions and get information. So it's like the difference between, going to, let's say, the Grand Canyon and going hiking in it and going down the river and spending a couple of months hiking around in it, or flying over it in an airplane.
Right, or watching a video about it.
Or watching a video about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the difference. So the drugs do put you in a real space, but it's if you don't actually own it, if you're not doing it on your own, then the problem with it is
it's like a cheat.
Well, it's not only a cheat, it's worse than that. You tend to interpret the data. The way the system works is you get a data stream and you have to interpret the data. Okay, that's the same way all virtual realities work. Yeah. You're playing World of Warcraft. The computer sends your computer a data stream, and it puts that data stream into a million dots of light on your screen.
You're taking binary bits that are coming through a data stream, and it's being projected onto a big computer monitor that's showing you 3D people moving around.
Yeah, well, what it's showing you is a million dots of light.
Right.
And you're looking at those million dots of light, and you're saying, oh, that's a river, and that's a tree, and this is another human, and so on. You interpret those bits.
Giving it meaning.
To be that. You give those bits meaning. It's your interpretation is your reality. So we get a data stream, and how we interpret that data stream is our reality. So you take a drug, and okay, now your data stream is different. It's not just the data defining this virtual reality anymore. Now it's data of something else altogether. But it's not something you've explored and understand. It's just there. Now you have to interpret that data. If you're not prepared and you haven't worked your way through this, people tend to be fearful, and they start to interpret this data in fearful ways. In the beginning, usually it's positive and happy stuff, and eventually it tends to turn negative and becomes scary stuff. But that's them. That's their interpretation. Your reality, even your reality here in this physical reality, is your interpretation of the data you get. So everybody really lives in their own reality. It's a multiplayer game, so we agree this is a table because it's a multiplayer game, just like two characters sit down at a table together in The Sims. They understand that that's a table because the computer is giving them both that information, and they both interpret it in a similar way. But your reality is really your own interpretation of the data you get. So in the subjective world, your interpretation is very large and very different from other people's interpretation. In the objective world, everybody kind of agrees about the table and where it is and what color it is and so on, its physical characteristics. In the subjective world, that's not true. Everybody sees it in their own way. And the way you see it is the way you interpret it, which has to do with how you are. So if you're a fearful person, you're going to end up with fearful components. If you're not a fearful person, you won't end up with fearful components because you won't interpret it that way. Oh, here's this big black thing. What is that? Oh, it's a monster because I'm fearful that I might get bitten out there. But if you're not fearful, then, oh, it's a cloud. And look, I see the silver lining around it, and it's a happy cloud. So it's how you interpret these things. So if you go up on drugs, then you don't know how to interpret it correctly. You tend to interpret it based on what you are inside, who you are. So you get a lot of self-created stuff there along with the real stuff. So it's a hodgepodge of stuff that you're creating and stuff that's there, and you don't know how to separate it. Whereas if you just go up because you've learned the skills to be able to go there and do that, then you don't have all that. You learn to interpret the data over time, over years of experience. Same at looking at a screen. When you're first when you're first born, okay, this is an apple, and this is mommy, and this is a door, and you learn things. It takes time for you to learn how to interpret things properly.
Yeah.
Now you see all the dots of light on your screen. Oh, right away, there's the mom, the apple, and the door. You know how to interpret it. But that's because you spent a lot of time learning. When you take a drug and go there, you haven't spent the time learning, so it gets a little squirrely, and it's not always what you see. What you think you've seen isn't necessarily what the data was at all. You're adding to that data stream. Data can come to you from three sources: the larger conscious system, some other consciousness, all consciousness is netted, and from yourself, your piece of consciousness. You can create information, and none of those sources have tags on them. You can't tell them apart except with experience. With experience, you can sort those out. Without it, it's just a jumble. So you don't know the data you create out of your fear is as real as the data that comes from the system. You can't separate them.
So you think there's one monolithic consciousness that exists, and that we are all little fragments of that same consciousness?
Yes.
And it's all connected. Yes,
we are subsets of that. So, this happy saying about we're all one, it's really true. We are. We're all subsets of that piece of consciousness, and we are not all in this virtual reality. There's other virtual realities, like I say, and there's some that are not in any virtual reality at all. But, well, I shouldn't say that. They don't go into this kind of a virtual reality.
Well, it's really interesting. We were talking about this with Ia Whiteley yesterday, and she explained how when one of the astronauts went up on one of the Apollo missions, he was looking at the Earth as they were flying away from it. Mm-hmm. And there was a psychological effect that overtook him, and they called it the observer effect, where he had this overwhelming feeling of being connected and being one with the entire planet. Mm-hmm. And he said that like the feeling sort of like lingered for a while when he got back, and it like made him depressed when he saw like how no one else felt that way on Earth. Right. And he only had that unique experience when he could just be so far away from Earth and just seeing that little sphere in the sky.
Yeah, that's one way to get there. There's another route you can get to something very similar, and many of the NDE, near-death experience people get that. Yeah. And you can, if you are kind of in charge of your own mind, you can experience it whenever you want. You don't have to almost die to experience it. And that is, you can become one with that larger conscious system. Basically, you get to see reality. You get to see everything through the eyes of the larger consciousness system. You can put it that way. And when you do that, you lose your personal identity. You're no longer Danny or Tom. You just exist, and you feel like you're a part of everything. You're every blade of grass. You're every leaf on a tree. You're every person, and you're one with all that is. And you feel the love. You feel connected, and it's usually very, very beautiful and a very profound experience. And that's attainable. That's what the Hindus called samadhi. Mm-hmm. You can go to that. To that space, that understanding is available. But if it's someplace that you like are familiar with and you know how to get there, is a lot different than if you get blasted up, on a drug, see it for a little bit and then crash. Mm. And your interpretation of it will be a lot better if you go up under your own steam and not go up with a lot of other stuff going on in your head that is not, that makes your interpretation wrong. So to get back to where we were, I guess I kind of got off on this, is that one of the ways the system works is that there is this big computer subset of the larger conscious system, and it is computing this virtual reality. In order to do that, it computes it in terms of probability. That's why this reality is based on probability. It's a probabilistic simulation. So it needs a database the rendering engine needs a database, and that database is everything that could possibly happen and the probability that it will. Mm-hmm. That's what it needs. And the way it decides what happens next is it takes a random draw from a probability distribution of the possibilities. So That's the mechanism that creates this. You go dig a hole in your backyard, and what are you going to find? Well, the highest probability is going to be dirt and rocks and roots and things like that. But if you're down here on the Gulf Coast, you might find a gold coin or something that was left over from 4 or 5 centuries ago. So they're all possible, but they all have different probabilities. The probability for that gold coin is much smaller than it is for a rock. So a random draw is taken out of that probability distribution, okay? And when it does, the things that are more probable are more likely to come out of that random draw. That's what it means to take the draw from a probability distribution of the possibilities.
Right.
So that's how those things are defined. So it needs this database to render. And this database, as time goes on, what was in the future becomes present and past. So you end up with a database I call the probable future database, everything that could happen, the probability it will. And you end up with a past database is everything that could have happened and the probability that it would. And then one little thread that runs through that past database is what actually did happen. All of that data is there and collected, and that's what the Hindus called the Akashic Records. That's, I don't know, maybe you're not familiar with that term, but that's where information comes from on your intuitive side. When you get information intuitively, then you're getting information out of this database.
Right.
Now, because it does a random draw from a probability distribution of the possibilities, that probable future is there, and what happens depends on those probabilities. This is our feedback mechanism, we can modify those probabilities with our intent. So if you have an intention, let's say your family's going to have a picnic next Saturday and you don't want it to be rainy, you want it to be sunny, you can put an intention out for it to be sunny. That intention will actually change the probabilities of that being sunny or rainy. The sunny will go up a little or rainy will go down a little bit. If you're good at it. If you're not good at it, it doesn't do a whole lot, it doesn't change much, but you can change things. And that's how the placebo effect works. You know, the placebo effect says, here, give these guys pills, tell them it's the greatest pill in the world and it's going to heal them. And
it'll actually have physical effects.
It has physical effects. That's why, because those people now have more positive thinking about the outcome. Oh, this is the magic pill that's going to help me. Great. And because they have this positive outcome, it actually modifies the probabilities to a more likely positive outcome.
It's funny because chemists have actually, psychedelic chemists have explained how psychedelic drugs are largely placebo, which is very interesting.
Yeah. Well, a lot of things are placebo.
Yeah.
You know, how we think does actually affect what happens. So that's how the healing takes place. You use your mind to modify the probabilities of them getting better, and then that means when that random draw is taken, or whether they're better today or not, well, the higher probability that they're better, and a lower probability that they're worse. So that's the mechanism, and that mechanism.
And that's learned. That's something that it's not just, it doesn't just come to you. That's something you have to practice and learn.
It's something you practice and learn.
Right. What do you make of Chris Bledsoe's ability to heal people that he talks about in his book?
Well, Chris Bledsoe was healed a couple of times himself, rather dramatically. I think the first time it was Crohn's disease.
Right.
And that was in the process of killing them, and that got healed. And then I can't remember what the second one is, but he had some other kind of
hit a shotgun wound. He got shot.
Yeah, he got shot in a shotgun wound, and that got healed. Now, once we could talk a little about Chris. Chris is a wonderful guy. I met him at the Psy Games. We talked for a while, and we set up a time for us to have a more extended conversation, because he had a lot of very dramatic experiences, and he doesn't really understand exactly.
He's been through a lot of trauma.
He's been through a lot of trauma, and he'd like to understand it better, and I can explain it to him better. So we're going to talk in the near future. But he was just a wonderful guy. I interacted with him and his sons, and I listened to his daughter sing a song beautifully.
Yeah. She's super talented.
Yeah, she's very talented. So anyway, when you...
But he was explaining being able to just touch and heal. Like there was in his book, there was a moment where his dog, I forget what happened to his dog. His dog was bit by something and it was bleeding profusely or was stuck by something. And he explained putting his hand on the dog and then this fresh wound just disappeared, vanished. And there was another story where he was at some dinner and a guy was having a heart attack or something like this. And Chris like went over to him and like put his hands on him and the guy was like perfectly fine right afterwards.
Yeah. Those kinds of things can happen.
And he thinks there's this lady, this divine woman who is, I forget what he calls her, but he thinks this is all biblical. Like this is a divine gift that he's been given. And this woman that is communicating with him is trying to tell him about some date when Jesus is going to come back or something like this.
Yeah. All of that is his own tools, his own tool set. It's metaphorical.
Right.
Things happen to people, and when things happen to people, people try their best to explain it in some way that seems rational to them. And the explanations they come up with are based on what seems rational to them. They make the best shot they can at explaining what's going on. But that doesn't mean that that's what's going on. It means that that's just their best explanation of it.
Hathor, that's what he calls the lady, Hathor, I think.
Yeah. So he's, a lot of people do that. They talk to angels. They do, you got all kinds of things like that. And basically that's people creating their own tools to explain things that they can't explain.
Yeah, they're putting a story to it.
They're putting a story to it.
Yeah.
Now, it's not that the story is wrong. It's just that that's their story.
Sure.
That's their metaphor
Sure.
for explaining what happens, because you can't really explain it because there aren't any words in our language that allows you to talk about things that are non-physical. Our language grew up here describing physical things,
right,
physical happenings, and it's not a good language for describing other things. So you're stuck, and you can't even think about it. Without language, you can't put the experience into a form that you could even tell somebody else. So we're forced, if we're going to explain what happened to us to somebody else, we're forced to make up a story that is as close as we can get to what we've experienced. But I think any of those will really tell you it's the story they put in the experience are two different. The story they make up and the experience are really two different things. They're just trying to do their best to do it. So it's not that it's wrong, it's just their metaphor for what happened to them. And
have you seen the orbs that he can summon?
No, I didn't get to. See.
Have you seen the videos of them? They're all over his Instagram. He goes out into the middle of the woods or in his backyard even, and he came here and did it on the beach for me and Steve. And he basically like prays, and for these angels to show up, and these orbs sure as shit, they show up and they move around in different directions. And I haven't been able to come up with any conventional explanation for what they are. I mean, they're real. I saw them. We filmed them, and he can do this everywhere he goes. And he's done it on camera many places, many times. They're all over his Instagram.
Yeah, I have heard about that, and I don't doubt it.
What do you think? What do you make of that? What do you think that could be?
These are some of the things I'm going to talk to him about, and maybe I should wait for that. But I can tell you that he has been picked out by the larger consciousness system to help wake other people up and see bigger pictures. The system does that. It does that in many ways. A lot of it is through personal experience, like he had. And remember, we are to grow up, become lower entropy consciousness by making better choices. Okay, that's what we do, and our growth is the system's growth because we're just a part of the system. We're a piece of it. So the system wants us to succeed, wants us to evolve, wants us to move toward love, and it will do things that help not only open an individual's mind, but help open lots of minds. So it'll do things that are just not understandable. It'll do things that are just off the wall and have no explanation, because that opens people's minds to realizing that it's not just this physical world that the physicists tell us about. There's something else going on. There's other things happening. That cracks open the mind, and we're getting to a point, humanity's getting to a point where we need to take bigger steps more quickly about growing up. That's a quickening that's coming over the next several decades. So the system is particularly trying to help us grow up, and it picked a person like Chris, partly because Chris asked for the help, and partly because he was a real decent, real straightforward, honest human being that they thought would make a good person to help share that. Also, the people have NDEs, and they have these experiences. Same thing, they're given the experience. They can come back, tell their friends, write a book, and now hundreds of thousands of people get the benefit and get to grow from that experience. It opens their minds. The crop circles. I've been over to the UK, walked around in those fields and, looked at the plants bent over and read the research and so on. And, overnight, when there's no light, usually no moon, and in one night you get 20 acres covered with some kind of fantastic, often mathematical, and these aren't straight lines. Straight lines, if it was straight lines, probably a surveying team could do it in 3 weeks, if there was 10 of them. But these nice curved lines and so on that are perfectly in symmetry. Well, we look at that and we say, that's impossible. It can't happen. Nobody could do that in the dark in one night, covering tens of acres often.
And you can't see them unless you're in an airplane, right?
Well, no, you can't appreciate them unless you're in an airplane, because then you get that view. So it takes a view. Now, surveyors could maybe do that, but probably not, because they trample all over everything in the way getting there, just trying to make all their angles and stuff. And they can't do curves worth a damn. They can just do straight lines. So it's pretty much impossible. So what do the people think? They think, well, it's impossible. We can't do it, so therefore, it must be aliens doing it. But that's just another mind opener with the aliens. It's just another mind opener. The larger consciousness system is doing it, and it's doing it to help crack our minds open, because we're going to have to do some serious growing in the next couple of decades. So it's kind of speeding that process up, and it picks people for the NDEs if they're not going to die, and it knows that by the probabilities. It can say, well, the probability that this person is going to come back is high. All right, so let's give them this experience, and they'll bring it back, and they'll write a book, and they'll, hundreds of thousands, millions of people will have their mind cracked open a little bit to reality being more interesting and more complex than just this physical world. So that's kind of where Chris came in. He was picked to have these experiences, and that's why he was given the gift of healing. He was given the orbs, because he's demonstrating to people that these strange, unexplainable things are real. It's part of our reality. Opens minds to a bigger picture, and that will help us make this transition that we're going to all go through in the next couple of decades.
Do you think there is a common characteristic that can be found in people that gives them a stronger connection to this monolithic consciousness that Chris Bledsoe seems to be tapped into? Like, are there certain people who have a stronger connection than others? And is there a way to strengthen your connection?
Sure. Everybody has the potential to do all of these things. It's not that you have to be special to do them. The way it works is that you come here, you make choices. By those choices, you evolve or you de-evolve. Okay, we've already talked about that. Next time you come around, your next lifetime, and I have multiple lifetimes in my model because it was a logical necessity, not because I think, that having multiple lifetimes, reincarnation was a cool idea, but it was logically necessary for the model. So anyway, you come back, but you start with the quality of consciousness that you earned up to that point. So you make good choices, you are helpful to people, you care about people, and that means you level up a little bit in your quality of consciousness. Next time, you'll start at that quality, but not with any of the knowledge, not with any of the intellectual knowledge of it, because you have to just apply who you are to new situations, make good choices. So in a way, you have to re-earn it. But it's who you are. It's easier for you to make good choices because you've learned to get rid of a lot of your fear. So yes, those people who come in who are have a higher quality of consciousness, just they've been around, made good choices, they then have an easier time of doing these things because they're more connected to consciousness, to the larger conscious system. They're more aware, they're more caring. That kind of person then has an easier time doing it. Yes. But everybody can. It's something you can learn. It's something you can practice. You get good at it with practice. It's not quick. You're not going to go take a crash course and, in 2 weeks become a wizard. It doesn't work like that. You have to grow. You have to change who you are. You have to let go of fear. Fear will create noise in your mind. You have to be able to clear your mind so that it doesn't have any noise in it. It doesn't have stray thoughts running around. You're focused, and you have to be able to put power in it. You have to be able to really be able to affect things, and you do that because of the quality of the consciousness that you have. So people who, like yogis, they spend a life meditating and doing these things, and many of them can heal. They can do lots of that stuff, and it's not because they train to do it. It just becomes available to them. They're just able to do that because of the quality that their mind has reached. But you can learn it. You can, I never had tried to heal anybody in my life till I got out to Bob Monroe's and wanted to just experiment with everything paranormal. We experimented with it. And I will tell you that being able to heal with your intent is probably the easiest paranormal thing that anybody can do.
Really?
It's not a hard one, yeah. Everybody thinks, oh, that would be hard. It's one of the easiest things. It's much easier to be effective if the result has uncertainty around it. The more uncertainty, the easier it is for you to change it. So somebody's health is very uncertain because we don't know enough about biology and physiology to really know what's going to happen next. Some people have stage 4 cancer and given, a month to live, and 2 weeks later they don't have any cancer at all. So there's lots of uncertainty as to what the outcome might be. If you have, a real bad illness of some sort, people get over it. Some people die from it, but there's lots of uncertainty. So where there's uncertainty, then you can modify the probabilities. And when you modify those probabilities, then you'll raise the probability of that person getting better. Doesn't mean they have to get better. You've just raised the probability.
Right.
So it depends where the probability was to start with. If it was a 1,000,000 to 1 that this person would get better,
right, because
they had 10 biopsies from 10 different doctors and they all said, it's going to kill you in a week, then the probability is very small that you're
versus
going to
somebody that gets hit by a freight train, and their body's completely destroyed and they're on life support or something like that.
Yeah.
It's going to be very low probability.
Yeah, very low probability you're going to do anything about it. So if the probability is 1,000,000 to 1, you may make it with your intent go all the way to 1,000 to 1. Well, that's a lot of power to change it that much, but you're still not likely to get it because it's, so you can change probabilities. It doesn't mean you can manipulate them to be whatever you want. Depends on the uncertainty that's involved in what it is that you're trying to do. That's a key part of it. But yes, healing is a simple thing because there's lots of uncertainty, and it's a thing that's easy to get focused on. It's not abstract. It's a more solid thing. So you can, I would say that if you started working on healing in a month, you'd see enough you'd see enough progress that you would convince yourself that you're being effective with it. It's just not hard to do. There's just some techniques, some tools that you can use, and you just kind of practice at it, and you'd be surprised at how effective you can be in a short period of time. It's one of the easiest paranormal things to be able to learn to do. Now, you may not be great at it. You may not be able to change everything you want, but you will have periods when your mind is more in the right spot. Low noise, high power, low noise, and good focus, and then you'll be more effective.
You got to practice this
but you have to
mindfulness
practice.
stuff.
You have to practice in order to do that. But that's just natural to anybody because we're consciousness. We get to affect those probabilities, and those probabilities is what determines what happens here.
So you mentioned you were just at this psychic games thing, and there's a woman I saw a video of that I don't know if we watched it yesterday on here or not, but I saw the video. It was like a short YouTube video of this girl who puts on like 10 masks over her eyes, and it completely blocks her vision, and is able to read a piece of paper random piece of paper they put in front of her. How is that happening?
It's done. It's just real-time remote viewing. You can remote view something that's not in front of you. You can remote view the Eiffel Tower while you're sitting here in Florida. If that's the coordinates you're given, you can see things. You're getting that data out of this database that I talked about. So that data's in the database, and you can see what's there. So you can go to the database and see what's here, what's just right in front of you. And you can do that in real time, and that's called seeing without eyes, or they have a lot of other names with it, but it works fine.
Can you do it?
I actually spent about 2 weeks working on it, and I was getting close to it, but I wasn't really interested in doing it as much as I was interested in finding out how they taught people to do it. But yes, if I've worked at it, if I spent 2 weeks, 3 weeks at it, then I'd be able to do it. But you have to practice these things. It's like anything else. If you don't practice them a lot, then you get rustier at them. You won't lose it altogether, but like
build the muscle.
Yeah, you have to keep the muscle, tuned up.
Steve, can you find the video of her doing that?
Yeah, the internet's slow. It's like taking forever to load.
Oh wow!
But the seeing without eyes, you talk about 10 masks. You can take somebody, put them in another room.
Right.
You can put them in another room and turn all the lights off and seal all the windows with black paper so that there's no light in that room. Put them in a basement with no windows, turn off all the lights, and put a mask on them if you like, and then you can go to some other part of the house and you can read the book that they have, or you can see what they're doing. It's just getting data from the database. It's real-time remote viewing rather than remote viewers think they have to go out and see a something at a particular place. That's remote viewing. They don't realize they're just getting data out of a database.
Has this ever been scientifically proven to work?
Yeah. Scientifically, not.
The problem with this stuff is it's not hard science, it's squishy science.
Well,
which is and it kind of exposes how the scientific method may not be like the holy grail of figuring stuff out in this world. But you can't measure this, you can't put it on a scale, you can't put it in a beaker and weigh it and quantify it. It's so much different.
No, what you said is exactly right. The scientific method is a really great method for doing the science of the objective world. It isn't worth a damn in the subjective world. The objective world, every scientist, wherever they are, doing the same experiment will have to get the same answer. It's not dependent on the scientist or the location or anything else.
Right.
The experiment will work the same way everywhere. Well, the objective world is like that. The subjective world isn't like that at all. In the subjective world, everybody's mind is different. Everybody's reality is different. Everybody's attitudes and feelings and beliefs and fears, all of that are different. So in the subjective world, nothing is always going to be the same for all the people everywhere. It all has to do with an individual and their consciousness. So that scientific method is only good for the objective world. It means nothing in the subjective world. But is it real? Sure. When I was taking this course of the seeing without eyes, trying to understand how it worked, there was a man came in who was blind. I mean, totally blind. And he came in and walked across the room, took off his jacket and hung it on a hook. And we're thinking, is he really blind? He didn't feel that hook or anything. He just knew where it was. And he had taken this course. He had learned to see without his eyes. So somebody went to the back of the room and they got a book. It was a bookshelf back there with about 20, 30 books on it. And they picked up a book, and this was a children's book. And they handed him the book, and he opened it up, and he started to describe. He was rubbing his fingers on over the pages, and he was describing, oh, this is a picture of a giraffe, and there's a little child over here, and there's a red balloon up in the corner. And so he described all the picture. And then he turns the book around, and we can see he's described it accurately. So then he turns 3 or 4 pages and does another one. So somebody asked him, says, well, how do you do that? And he said, well, I do it with my fingers. I can see through my fingers. Well, that was just, remember I talked about tools? People have tools. They make up metaphors to explain what they're doing. Mm-hmm. That was his metaphor because he was blind. He saw through his fingers with Braille. So he had that same metaphor he'd see with his fingers. He wasn't seeing with his fingers. He's getting data out of the database. And that's where he was getting the pictures from. But in his mind, he was seeing with his fingers. So if you put the book out where he couldn't touch it, he wouldn't be able to do it because he believes that he's using his fingers. So these are tools that we make up. But this blind guy was able to see the book perfectly. He described the colors, and these weren't pictures that were raised. These are just printed. Right. There's just ink on a piece of paper, mass-produced, and there was no feel different to any of it. It all just felt like paper. Mm-hmm. So, yes, now you see that happening. So somebody asked me, is it real? Of course it's real. And then one of the students there was a lady from Scandinavia.
Steve, this isn't the video.
Was a lady from Scandinavia, and she was one of the people that very quickly did learn to see without her eyes in this course. And I took her outside and walked her around outside, and I held on to her so she wouldn't fall off a curb or something. And I asked her questions like, what color is the house that's in front of you? And she told me, it's blue. How many garbage cans are outside? 5. What color are they? 3 are green, 2 are blue. And a car pulled up, parked. So I marched her over to the car and I said, what's the license plate? That car just came from anywhere, So it's not like this could be programmed or whatever. We're just outside looking at things. And this was someplace in Germany. She didn't live here. This wasn't her territory. So she read the license plate, and I walked up to a door that had some kind of sign, it was like this, some text. She could read it. And I checked her blindfold, and that she was obviously seen without her eyes. So I experienced a blind man, and there was probably 5 or 6, 7 of the 20 people there, probably 8 of them were able to see without their eyes in 2 weeks. These are adults. That's awfully quick. Usually adults take longer. Now, the lady who teaches that says, give her a 5-year-old and she'll teach him in an hour.
Right.
Because they don't have the beliefs that we have.
Yes.
And it turned out, the thing I learned at that course was really significant, was that it's all about the belief was the main thing. I asked the lady that I took outside and turned around. I said, well, how are you able to do this? And she said, I cheat. And I said, well, how are you cheating? She says, I get a little light in from my mask, and that's how I can see. So I checked her mask, and cheating was impossible. But she had to convince herself that she was cheating in order to be able to do it. So the people who were there, who were more right-brained, could more easily convince themselves that they were doing it some way. That was okay with them. The left-brain people, the techies, the engineers and so on were there, they needed more facts. Mm-hmm. They couldn't. You see, I'm a physicist, so I know that light comes in around the edge of a mask. That light has to bounce 3 or 4 times before it gets to the eyeball. And after light bounces, it doesn't have any information at all. But this lady didn't know that because she wasn't a physicist, so she saw a little bit of straight light coming in there, and that then justified in her mind how she could see without eyes.
Wow.
So once she got past the belief problem, and I realized that was the key thing, was getting people past their belief that it was impossible. And as soon as they got past that, it was easy. And that's why 5-year-olds are easy, because they don't have that ingrained belief that this is impossible. To a 5-year-old, life is magical,
Yes.
All kinds of things happen and they have no idea why, they just do. So if
They're curious.
they're curious. So if the adult says, here, you can see without your eyes, you read this book, they go, oh, I can? Okay. And they can with just a little coaching. So it's the belief thing that we turn off those things because we're told that they're impossible. So then I went around to everybody in there who was successful, who could read without their eyes through the mask. These are big masks. The masks go way out here and way up here. They're not little tiny masks. They're really big masks that cover you. And every one of them that was the adults that were successful said that they cheated. But I was also wearing a mask. I know what that mask was like because I had one on too. And I could make it such that you could see a little glow someplace. But I knew that glow had no information in it whatsoever.
And, also children. I mean, children just on a different, from a different perspective, children, it seems like they have a deeper connection to something that we, as we get older and we get adapted to the rigid frameworks of our society, and the more we start relying on technology and using technology to compensate for other things, it seems like these abilities that may be ancient inside of us have atrophied, and they atrophy more from birth to the time we get older and we start getting used to technology and being brought up in this technological world we live in. And like newborn children, they seem to have, like with those telepathy tapes, they seem to have more of a tuned extrasensory thing that's inside of them that we don't have. And it makes me wonder how many more things are out there that we can't detect. Like a smell. Like if we didn't have a nose, we wouldn't know. We wouldn't have any idea of these smells or aromas that are all around us, right? So like how many things are out there that exist that we just don't have the sensory organs to perceive?
Well, there's a lot of things that exist outside of our sensory organs. Our sensory organs just follow the rules in the rule set, this physical world. So we're trapped inside the physical world with our physical senses, but we can see, hear, taste, smell, and touch things that are non-physical. But again, it's us taking information and turning it into physical metaphors. Okay, so you get information and it just comes to your mind. And eventually you just learn to accept that. But initially you tend to hear things. I heard a voice and it said, so you're taking the information and you're turning it into language because that's easier for you to deal with that than it is that, I just know. So people tend to hear things more initially. Eventually you don't question the just knowing and you don't have to hear it to make it real. You just get the information. So all of that information that's in that database is available to any consciousness. It's not only are children more adept at that than adults. Now, your children are more intuitive at 2 and 3 years old, than you are now by a long shot. Your dog and your cat are more intuitive than you are. The kids who had autism, their normal processing wasn't available. That was not working for them. The hearing, the speaking, the whatever wasn't working very well for them. It was kind of chaotic. So what did? They developed their intuitive processes. You have two different pathways that you process information. One is that logical intellectual path. Okay, that's what most of us adults use all the time. The other is an intuitive path. The logical path is logical. The intuitive path is not logical. You just get information. There's no reason or whatever. The information is just there, and you download it. You query that database with your intent. You have an intent to know, and there it is. That's the query, and you get it. Most people get information like that all the time, but they refuse it because they believe that there's nothing there. Just like the seeing without eyes, people couldn't see without eyes as long as they, But once they could somehow account for it, then they could do it. So, yes, children are much more connected to us. Children, we think that young children, 2-year-olds who don't speak very much, just a few words, and 3-year-olds whose vocabulary is very, very small, we think they don't understand. They understand a whole lot more, but they're not getting it through language. They're getting it intuitively.
Right.
They understand a whole lot more. Your dog understands you more through the intuitive sense, not through language. Dogs don't do language, but they know. You're thinking about, I think I'll get up and take the dog for a walk. And you think about that, and 30 seconds later, your dog's running around in little circles in front of the door. He's anticipating the walk that you were thinking about. They pick up those feelings. All consciousness are netted, so you can have communication with your dog. That's not that hard. All you have to do is make a mind-to-mind connection with your dog and realize you're not going to get language, you're going to get feeling. That's their world is in terms of feeling, what they feel like. And you can find they feel sometimes upset and sometimes annoyed and sometimes like having fun, but you can make that communication, and you can communicate your feelings to the dog, and they will get that. So all consciousnesses they're all on the net, and you can, just like on the internet, to look at somebody's website, you got to go up and put in their URL, and then if you don't want to look at it, you click on the little X in the upper right-hand corner. You can do the same thing. You can open up a portal so that you connect with this consciousness, and you can close it off. And you do that all with your intent. Now, the people you're close to, like your kids and your family and so on, your best friends, you're more open. You get their ideas. You get their thoughts. You can kind of feel their feelings. You know where they are. If you pay attention, you can. People who you don't know, you generally don't connect with them until you want to. I just met George, or George telling me about his sick mother. I go in and see how she's doing. Then you can open up that connect. You can find the data in the database. It'll tell you exactly what she's doing. And you can look at the database and say, what's the probability she's going to get better on her own over the next month? And you can say, I want health here, I want time here, and you can see a curve.
Right.
And if you want to say, how good is that probability? I want to see error bars of to 2 standard deviations, and you'll get curves along your curve that'll give you 2 standard deviations in probable error. The information's there,
right?
And you can determine the output format. You can request any output format. It'll come. It'll come in graphs. It'll come in colors. It'll come in images of whatever you relate to. The system will give you the output that you want. So these are tools. Everybody has these abilities. Mind-to-mind communication is a great way for parents to communicate with their teenagers. That's a really good example, because teenagers want to make their own choices. That's what they're doing. They're becoming adults, and they need to start making their own choices, and they don't like it when mom or dad tell them what they should be doing or what they should be feeling or how they should be acting, so they push that away. So sometimes it's really hard to communicate with your teenagers, because if you say, you really ought to go right instead of left here, they'll tend to go left because they need to do it on their own in their own way.
Yeah.
So you can talk to them mind to mind and give them some guidance, as long as you don't try to give them direction. If you say, do this, do that, that will backfire. They don't want that. But if you go in and say, there's other possibilities here that you haven't thought of. You should consider this and consider that. Now you're being helpful. You're not trying to overrun their free will. You're trying to give them information that they can use. They'll accept that. And that can be a very helpful tool for helping give your kids guidance that they can accept. So, a lot of us do this anyway. Right brain people are very good at it. Right brainers, people who are intuitive, they're very good at it, and some just pick it up very naturally. Often, the people who are good at it are people who had very troubled childhoods and had to escape the pain in this reality by spending time in another reality, by escaping this reality into an imaginary world. So they trained themselves to be open to outside information, outside of this reality. And that's when they were 4 and 5 and 6 and 8 and 10. And now they're 30 or 40 and they're naturals, they're mediums, they're this, they're that, because they trained themselves by escaping a dysfunctional childhood. So you often will find the connection between people who seem to be gifted and people who had to escape. That's why they learned these skills, so they could escape to an imaginary place that was better. Well, in their mind, it was an imaginary place.
There are some people who think that that trauma is one of the common things that help people become more open to this and more intuitive and have this sort of sense. When you're talking about things like Chris Bledsoe has, or whatever. I mean, obviously he's been through a lot of trauma, but I think there's people like Jeffrey Kripal who have studied this extensively, that people who have undergone lots of trauma throughout their lives, and especially during their childhood, have more of a stronger connection to this monolithic consciousness or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. People who have very serious trauma are people who've kind of reached a dead end, reached the end of their rope, so to speak.
Yeah.
They're put in a situation where all the normal moves and ideas and whatever's aren't available to them anymore. And when you're in that, you tend to start searching for another way. You start opening up to other things. So, a lot of the people that are also into, spiritual things, teachers and people, you'll find that they first went through what's called the dark night of the soul. They were miserable people. They were self-centered. They were this and they're that, and life got tougher and tougher, and they went down this spiral until they got to this bottom part where it just couldn't get any worse. And they throw up their hands and give up, and they either want to die or they need something, but they kind of quit. Right. And in that moment of desperation, they actually open up to something outside of them. They stop the interacting with the physical world, and they start opening up inside.
Yeah.
And that then becomes the beginning of a whole new, they climb back up out of that hole and keep on going, and then they become spiritual teachers later.
Right.
But a lot of that's where it starts. And so that's trauma. That's just another that's like a self-induced trauma rather than something coming out and, hitting you. It's something you do to yourself. But that trauma puts people into a place of, having to open up to other things, because just the normal pathways aren't working. They're not available for some reason. So they open up, like Chris Bledsoe said, he was desperate. He had this Crohn's that was killing him, and he basically said, I need help. He was at the bottom. He couldn't function. He couldn't do the things he needed to do. He couldn't earn a living. He couldn't, he couldn't do the things he had to do for his family and so on. So he got desperate. And when you're desperate, instead of chugging along in the physical, doing this physical thing and that physical thing, he like, say, I give up. I need help.
Right.
I need to change. Something has to change.
Mm-hmm.
And you open yourself up to something, and something happens, particularly if the system says, oh, here's a good person we could use. We can give them some insight and some abilities, and they will spread the word that life is not just all tied up in this nifty physical box. There's other things going on besides.
Right.
So you think that this information system that we are a part of is slowly over time becoming lower entropy, meaning that we're becoming more open, we're becoming more loving, more one? Do you think this evolution has been on a nonstop linear path since the first conscious being came into existence?
Yes, but it's not linear. So in the beginning, when we were cave people traveling in small tribes kind of things, the world was a very tough and harsh place, and there was a lot of violence. If you saw somebody else had something you needed, it was you or them. So you made that wrong. You made that wrong decision to take their stuff for yourself. But so we start there, with control, power, force is kind of the ethic. And humans have been walking around on the planet for roughly 200,000 years, depending on who you read. that can be a much different number, but around 200,000 years is where Homo sapiens been here. And you can think of that change was very slow in the beginning, very, very slow. So I'm looking here at a graph. I'll do it backwards so that people who are viewing it can see it forwards. But let's say this is time on the horizontal axis, and this is quality of consciousness here. So it just doesn't go up much. It stays just maybe a little tiny bits. And then we got to civilization, where people started interacting more and being more interdependent, and it goes up a little bit. Then it starts to go faster and faster, and it shoots up. Mm-hmm. So that's because it's an accelerating function. The more you learn, the easier it is to learn more. Learning is that way.
Yeah.
When you first start learning, it's difficult. You need to learn numbers. You need to learn the alphabet, and everything is just really hard. But eventually you can learn a lot faster. So right now, as this curve goes like this, and then at knee of the curve, that's where we are right now. If you go back 500 years and look at what was humanity like 500 years ago, and you will realize it was very rough. It was a lot of violence, a lot of dysfunction going on. There were the people in charge could pretty much do whatever they damn well pleased, and everybody else had to suck it up. It was a hard place. So if you look at every year, every century, 500 years ago, for the last 5 centuries, you'll see that we've gotten better and better. Yeah. We're coming up, and the last 5 centuries are just an eye blink in 200,000 years. So not much, just slowly, and then again, it goes more quickly. So we're right at the knee of that curve. The last 500 years, we've done more in the last 500 years than we did 195,000 years before that. And that quickening is coming, that we're going to have in the next few decades choices of whether we go on up and start taking bigger steps instead of tiny little steps. The steps have been getting better. Last 500 years, each century takes a little bigger step in that positive direction. But now we're in line for some bigger steps. And the first time ever, humanity has an opportunity to take some big steps. And that's mostly because of the internet. It used to be that a big earthquake kills 100,000 people in someplace, and people someplace else really don't care because they don't even know where that is. They may have never heard the name of that country or have no idea anything about it, so not my problem.
Yeah.
And now that's not the case. Now you get to see poor little starving children with pot bellies, wherever they occur, and destruction and death and bodies. And people send money. People care. People see it. So we've gone from being people that we don't really care about to...
It's making it less easy to get away with evil.
Yeah, so we're becoming more of a family rather than a bunch of relatives out there that we've never heard of. So that's what the internet's done. It's brought us together. Things happen and everybody gets to see about it.
There's also an argument to be made that our internet has driven us apart and made us less healthy and forced us into echo chambers. And
every technology has its upside and its downside. You don't get the upside unless the downside comes with it.
Sure.
When you have an internet, it can be used for good things and it can be used for bad things. Mm-hmm. And it can help us in some ways and it can hurt us in other ways. That's just true.
It's just like anything, risk reward.
Exactly. And we have to deal with that. That's our job. We have to look at that new technology and find ways to mitigate the downside and ways to embrace the upside. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to be doing here. But anyway, we have the opportunity to make choices now in the next, I think, like 3 decades that will either make a lot of progress or will fail. And we'll go backwards a bit. But if we go backwards a bit, it's only temporary. You know, evolution is slow, but it's relentless. So evolution may chug along, but it may go back, but it just keeps on chugging along. And, you know, you may have a big meteor strike and all kinds of dust everywhere and a lot of everything dies off, but it comes back. Because it's relentless. So we will make it. One day, humanity will make it to that place where life will be kinder, gentler, and more supportive, and everybody will have the maximum amount of personal freedom. But we have to make the choices that takes us there. It's not going to be given to us, but we have the opportunity to make a couple of really big steps in that direction. Now, will mankind make those steps, or will they drop that probability? That's up to us. So people who are your age and your children's age, they're going to live through all that, all these times that are, like we're getting to that knife edge where it's going to fall to this side or it's going to fall to that side. This side's positive and wonderful, and this side sucks.
Right.
So we're getting to those places, and the people that are alive and young now will live through all of that decision making, probably.
Do you think it's possible that far in the past we evolved to be super low entropy and achieve this pinnacle of consciousness, and then maybe we were wiped out or reset by some sort of a cosmic cataclysm or something like this?
No, I don't think so. I think that we were...
or maybe even escaped Earth.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's the case. I think that when the larger conscious system made this virtual reality for us to play in, we got here and it was tough, but people were far spread. We spread a lot. We didn't really have civilization then. We just had a bunch of tribes making their own way. Then we ended up with civilization where we were stuck in cities where we were next to each other and we had to cooperate more and share. And you had the people that made the shoes and the people that made the weapons and the people that built houses and the thatcher and so on. We got interactive and interdependent. That helped us grow then faster than when we didn't, when we were all just kind of nomads wandering around in space that was mostly empty. So yes, it's been a long, gradual process of us growing. Now, to grow up, you have to change who you are. It's not a matter of intellectual growth. It's not a matter of understanding intellectually. It's a matter of being. It's not like acting kind is going to help you. Being kind is what makes you grow up, not acting. Right. So you have to change who you are. You have to be different. That's why it's so slow. If it was just that we all could act, all we needed would be a script, and we could all do really well. But it's not about acting. It's about being. And no, I don't think that happened, although I do have one historical fact that kind of puts a timeline on it, and that is that this larger consciousness system, when it went from a monolithic thing to a thing with lots of individuated piece parts that we talked about, it had to learn, just like we have to learn, it had to learn to cooperate. It was just consciousness, and it had always been just one monolithic thing. So when now it had all these piece parts, it made those to give it a richer set of possibilities. And I think it started out by saying, all right, all you piece parts, here's what we're going to do today. We're all going to practice being kind. We're all going to do this and do that. And all the piece parts that had free will went, not today, I'm going fishing, because they were independent. So the system then got a little forceful, tried to push them, tried to bully them, tried to threaten them into doing what it wanted, its idea of, and it discovered that that didn't work. Whenever you tried to bully or force or regiment, it always turned out to make things worse, not better. So the system itself had to learn to become love. And we were the foil by which it had to learn that. It had to learn to treat us with respect and with caring and let us grow up, because you can't force anybody else to grow up. You have to let them grow up from the inside out.
Right.
So that's how the larger conscious system grew up. Now, we're doing that with each other. And the historical point here is that if you go to the Old Testament, you'll find, this is the Christian Old Testament, it goes back, 5,000 years BC or further back in its history of the Israelites and so on. And you will find that there was a angry and jealous God. And if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'll turn you into a pillar of salt. You had this kind of attitude going on. And then you get to the New Testament, and God is love. It's all about love and turning the other cheek and doing unto others as you have them do unto you. Well, what changed that angry and jealous God into the God of love? That was the larger consciousness system trying to bully the individuated units of consciousness into doing what it wanted and realizing that didn't work. And then it grew up. It had to change what it was at its being level. It's a conscious system. It's aware. It didn't just happen to be full of love and perfect. It had to learn that, just like we have to learn that. So you have that history that dates back into 5,000 BC, or maybe before that, maybe even 10,000 BC. I'm not quite sure how far back that goes. But in any case, that kind of puts a timeline to it, if that indeed is a case, if that difference between Old Testament and New Testament was the fact the larger conscious system had to learn to grow up itself. And now it's helping us learn to grow up by getting people like Chris Bledsoe and crop circles and lots of people who get this message, and many of them get it just through something personal. Some personal thing happens to them and they experience the paranormal in a very dramatic way. And then they become seekers, and they go out on the internet and see, did this happen to anybody else? And that's, if you go to a place like the Psy Games, you'll find that, if you ask the people, well, how'd you get involved in this? Most of them will say, well, when I was such and such, this happened to me, and ever since then, you get that. So that's kind of the movement, and the system is helping us grow up by creating those kinds of experience. I talked to a woman once who said that her mother died, and about 10 days after her mother's death, she had a phone call, and she picked it up, and it was her mother. It was her mother's voice. And the mother said something like, hi, and called her some baby name that nobody else would have known. Called her that and said, I just wanted to let you know that I'm fine and you don't have to worry about me. And the lady was so freaked out that she immediately thought that somebody was playing with her, and she slammed the phone down. And then a few minutes after that, she wished she hadn't, because she realized that was her mother. Because of the baby name nobody else knew. It couldn't have been anybody else fooling around. So now that lady becomes a seeker, right? She starts searching the internet for other people who have talked to their dead parents, and she finds that thousands of people have talked to their dead parents. So that's the system, sometimes one at a time, but then these people collect and they talk to each other and somebody writes a book. It's kind of the waking up period is what we're going through now. That's what you're doing. You're here, running this podcast, and you're talking about things that are off the map for most people, right? These are things that are unusual. And a lot of these unusual things are there to help people wake up. This reality is not as buttoned down as you thought. It's not just this simple physical thing. That's what most of the UFO things are about. It's just another way, like crop circles, to get people to open their minds to something more than what they've been fed all their lives, to have a sense that greater possibilities exist.
Yeah.
So that is a lot of that. Now, it's a virtual reality, so if the system wants to have a little flying saucer land in your backyard, it's a virtual reality. It can do that. It's just a data stream. So it puts that little flying saucer in your backyard, and it puts divots where all its little landing pads were, and it puts a charred place in the middle, and the little green guys with the pointy ears come, and you feed them dinner, and you all sit around and talk, and they get back in their ship and they fly away, and maybe they leave an artifact, or just they leave burnt spaces in your yard and whatever. So that's simple. It's a virtual reality. It's just data put in a data stream. And if there's
some people are getting even like radiation poisoning and radiation burns and stuff from these things too, which is wild.
Yeah. Well, those kinds of things can happen. People, they found out when they started to explore like hypnotism, where you give people suggestions and you can do all kinds of things with that. You can have people get a big rash on their arm because you give them that suggestion.
Right.
There's a big connection between mind and body.
Yes.
And a lot of things can happen that happen basically in consciousness that end up in physical manifestations.
And you don't think it goes the other way, right?
No, it's not the other way. The only thing that goes the other way is that if you have something happen, say, to the avatar, it doesn't change the consciousness. It provides constraints for the consciousness. Let's say you get in an accident, now you have brain damage, and you can't remember your name, you can't remember where you live, you mumble.
That's like how I am now.
You drag your left foot, you have brain damage, so you don't physically operate the same anymore. Well, your consciousness doesn't have brain damage. There is no brain. That brain is never rendered unless somebody's head's cut open.
Right, like a video game.
Yeah,
you're not
it's just
rendering
like a
unless
video
you're
game.
Yeah,
you're
saving processing power.
Yeah, exactly. So now the consciousness has to play a character that can't remember its name and drags its left foot. So that it affects the consciousness in that way. It doesn't actually affect the consciousness, but it gives the consciousness a set of constraints it has to work within. But yes, mind can create all kinds of physical things. Matter of fact, there's several doctors. Dr. Sarno is one of them who, after Sarno, Dr. Sarno, don't remember his first name, he's dead now, but he has a lot of people some people who are still practicing his stuff. He realized that an awful lot of ailments had a emotional and a mental component to them. And he said that once he explored this and found ways to work with this, that about 80% of all the patients that walked in his door, the physical problems they had could be resolved with working with them on an emotional level.
Right. Well, it's certainly true that when people are diagnosed with a cancer and told they have a month left to live, that's going to really affect their state and make them depressed and make them lose all hope. And that is going to have a snowball effect on their outcome. And
absolutely. And all their friends.
Imagine if they had that same diagnosis, that same tumor or whatever the cancer was, and instead they said, look, this happened to you, but most people survive. Everything's great. You just need to do these things, go outside, blah, 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 blah. Encourage that person to encourage an elevated state. You know what I mean? Instead of basically painting this dark portrait for them for their future.
What's worse than that, that patient goes back and they tell their spouse, they tell their kids, they tell their brothers and sisters and their neighbors, oh, I've got cancer and I'm going to die in a month. So now you have another 20 people all with that image of this person dying in another month, all of them sad, all of them negative, and that probability of dying just goes right up. So that's a problem.
Wow.
You have now a bunch of people doing it, and a lot of people are more powerful. If you get like they call these things healing circles. They're not really circles. They're just a bunch of people that get together to try to heal. And if you had 10 people who are all of equal strength and ability, they will be able to do 10 times as much as one of them. It adds. It's all additive. They're all putting their effort to modifying the probabilities. Some will be better than others, but if they're all equal, then 10 of them will be 10 times more effective than one of them. So yes, you get all your neighbors and your friends and your family all miserable and upset because you're going to die, then that probability that you're going to die just gets jacked right up. Now, I'm not going to tell people that they should not go to doctors. That's not a good idea. But you should first work on something. Let's say you feel a little lump here in your neck, and that bothers you. Instead of running right to a doctor immediately, these things generally, they're time sensitive, but not that time sensitive. Take 2 weeks to work on it. Take 2 weeks to use your mind to say, that's benign. It's just fatty tissue collected in there. There's nothing too serious about that. Do that in a meditation state, or do that just when you're quiet and by yourself. Yeah. Do that for 2 weeks, because anything you're going to do, you'll be able to do it within the 2 weeks. If you take a month, you're not going to be much better at it. So do that for 2 weeks, and then go see the doc, instead of running in to see the doc while you're scared. Oh, that might be a cancer. You've just jacked up the probability that it is a cancer. So just relax, let it go, accept that it will be whatever it is, and whatever it is, you'll deal with it. Don't feed it negative energy, and try to feed it positive energy. It's just a fatty tissue, or it's just benign in some way. Then you go into the doc. Don't not go to the doc. Go to the doc, but work on it first for a little bit of time. That then would be a better way to deal with those things, because most medical things are not on that fast of a timetable. I mean, some things are. Obviously, you're bleeding out. You're not going to sit down and think about it. You're going to try to go someplace where they can fix it. But if it's something like cancer or something else, then you've got 2 weeks that you can. Most people put it off that long anyway, before they decide that they need to go in. Well, instead of using that 2 weeks to worry about it, use that 2 weeks to fix it. And get your friends to fix it. Put positive energy in there if they're friends that are positive. If you got negative friends, you'll say, oh, no, I bet he's got cancer. Well, don't tell them about it.
Going back to this UFO stuff, do you think it's possible that there could be another civilization living somewhere on the earth that is like far more advanced than us? Like, for example, right now, if you compare us living in the Western world, people living in Silicon Valley, driving these autonomous vehicles, using phones to communicate, implanting brain chips in people to fix things like, paralysis or whatever. At the same exact time, there's people running around naked in the Amazon. So do you think that you can extrapolate that and compare us, say we're the naked people in the Amazon? Are there people that are that much more advanced than us that we don't know about?
I suspect not. Physically advanced. You're talking about physical advancements.
Technological or physical,
advancements.
Right.
Now, if you're talking about advancements in quality of consciousness, yes. There are probably there may be groups of people who are have a much higher quality of consciousness than we do in our world. And these are probably going to be Argarian people who spend their days sitting out in their field watching their sheep eat grass to make sure the wolves don't get the sheep, because they live a simple, uncomplicated, direct life, connected with nature, not a lot of stress. They've learned to cooperate with the environment that they have. They have their good days and bad days, but basically they probably are people who are more adjusted to their life and to what's going on, and they probably have a lot less stress than people running around trying to beat Wall Street.
But what do you make of these corroborated experiences and sightings of these like flying saucers, or if you want the stuff that the Harvard psychiatrist John Mack talked about with these abduction experiences, people being sucked up into spaceships and having their eggs and sperm extracted, and talking about they're from the future and they look like children with like little bodies, big heads and eyes. Like it's obviously like something that he's interviewed hundreds of people and they all explain the same exact thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, these are things that happen within consciousness. Okay, there is no physical reality. We only have the information that we're fed in a data stream. That is our reality. Well, I shouldn't say that. Our interpretation of that is our reality. Now, there are, if you want to, again, put a spaceship someplace or get sucked up into a spaceship and have somebody operating on you, that's just data in a data stream. Now, you feed that data stream yourself. Remember, I said there's 3 ways you get data. You get data from the large kind of systems, you get data from other IUSCs, and you get data from yourself. You create it. And most of your experience is a hodgepodge of all 3 of those. So, that experience of being beamed up and then had something done to you, that's a standard fear test kind of experience. The system does a lot of fear testing to see what you're ready for next. What can it put into your data stream that will help you grow up? What level are you? Where are you? And what kind of things are going to help you grow up rather than frighten you and make you go backwards? So they do some fear testing, and that's one of the fear tests. It's kind of a standard test, so a lot of people get that. And if they get a very fearful approach to it, oh no, who are these people? What are they doing? I feel totally helpless. I'm out of control. Oh, they're going to do this and that to me. If you get that, then your own fear will start to add to that story. And it'll get worse and it'll get horrible and they'll do worse things to you. You'll start to add to the story. And that is one fear test, and a lot of people get fear tests. There's a lot of other fear tests that people get. People who start going out of body, often they'll run into monsters. They get out of body for the first time and they meet some kind of monster with big bloody teeth or something, and they run and jump back in their body and it's gone. And now they're upset with themselves because they've been wanting to get out of body for years and they finally do, and they run from it. Those kinds of tests, we get those while we're dreaming. We get those can just happen to us. We get a data stream. We may be sitting on the back porch at 2:00 in the afternoon, perfectly sober, and get that in our data stream. And there may be 5 people with us that all get the same thing in their data stream. So everybody sees the flying saucer. It just depends. The system will do that to challenge us, to see at what level we are. And if we feed it with our own fear, then it turns out to be a lot worse than it would be if we didn't. So that's the problem. It's not going to be that the system gives us something horrible. It doesn't. It gives us something that is more benign than that. So I can tell you, I've had similar experiences to that too. I've had my sessions with the flying saucers and the beamed up and interacting with beings.
You had experiences like that of being abducted?
Yes, I've had experiences like that.
In your sleep or like fully conscious?
Well, in my awareness, I was fully conscious. But in actuality, I was just getting a different data stream. And I dealt with that. I dealt with it without a lot of fear. And it turned out okay. But it was the same sort of thing that I hear when others talk about it. And I kind of thought, well, this is not a good thing, but a bad thing. It's something I'll watch out for, and I let it go, and it didn't happen anymore. It was that kind of a thing.
Happened once?
Probably a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. But what happens when they give you these tests, they'll give it to you, and then they'll modify it and give you it again if you do well. they'll give you another one, see if you do well. And if you pass 2 or 3 of them, then it wasn't just lucky guess, it was you've already passed that point, so then you don't get them anymore. And as I went back to it and inspected it, those experiences, I think it was just the larger conscious system trying to give an assessment of who I was and how I would interact and how much fear I had in
How
me.
old were you when this happened? How old were you when this alien abduction happened?
I wouldn't really call it an alien abduction.
Right, well, you're calling it a data stream test or something like this, but it's for normal for somebody who isn't aware of this. They would call it an alien
exactly.
abduction.
People again make up a story to fit the experience.
Sure.
So that's the alien abduction story that fits the experience. But I had an experience, and it also was put in the context of some other beings in kind of a spaceship. I mean, that was the story that was given to me. And I was like teleported there, if you will.
What were you doing prior?
Ended up there. I'm trying to think about how old I was. I was probably late 20s, early 30s for me.
Wow.
That happened. But see, I had been working already for some years with Bob Monroe, so I had a little more savvy with mind and consciousness and that kind of stuff than the average person was. So I looked at it not from a personal, this is scary viewpoint, but from this is an interesting trip. This is an interesting reality.
What were you doing leading up to when that happened? Do you remember?
I think, what was I doing? The moments before?
Yes.
I was probably just lying in a bed, not sleeping, being awake with my mind kind of drifting. I hadn't gone to sleep yet, but I wasn't, I was in a twilight state. I guess they call that. It's kind of in a twilight state. And then suddenly all these things started to happen from this twilight state. So I hadn't gone to sleep yet, but it wasn't a dream. It was something else. It was just an experience that I got. Experience is information. Data defines the experience. So that happened. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. I experienced it. I let it go. But I had a lot of experience by that time. I'd been going out to Monroe for some years.
Yeah.
And strange experiences were almost every day for me. I could put it into a perspective. If you just got that out of nowhere, it would be probably scarier and more of a problem. But
sure.
I had lots of experiences that were unexplainable. So another unexplainable experience was not that big a deal.
How would you describe the beings that you saw?
They were not like us, very different, weren't human. The beings that I saw, the beings that did that weren't human.
Were they hominid looking, upright, 2 legs?
Mostly hominid looking, yes. But very different. And again, that's the picture I paint. I get the data, and I have to put the face on it. I have to I have to make the story to describe it. So now if I read a lot of books about, grays and people with big eyes and that sort of thing, that's probably that'd be the story I'd put on it.
Right.
But I didn't have that stuff then. It wasn't that popular. So I made up my own pictures, and they were just very strange. They weren't humans.
Did they communicate? Was there any communication?
Yes, there was some communication. I talked with them. They talked with me. But the feeling that I got during that communication was sort of like the feeling you get when the guy at the used car store tells you only a little old lady, owned that car and she only drove it on Sundays. You get
really?
You get that feeling that they were telling you things, but that you really couldn't believe it or take it too seriously.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was kind of off, and you had this idea that there was something else going on, besides what you were experiencing. There was another component to it. So you had that sense of the experience. So you weren't quite sure. Yes, they were saying things, but you weren't quite sure that there was another what do you call it? Another agenda. There was some other agenda going on.
You smelled bullshit.
Yeah, you smelled something. It's not all what you see. What you see is just what you see. There's other stuff going on that you don't know about. So you definitely got that as a strong opinion. But that was part of the stuff that was going to check your fear level.
That's interesting because, speaking about John Mack, there was a famous case that he studied in Zimbabwe, in Rua, Zimbabwe, at the school, Ariel School, where all of these children, I think there was like 14 or 15 children, all saw being standing outside of the playground, like beyond the playground, staring at them and communicating to them with feelings. They said there was no no auditory, there was no words being transmitted, but they were looking into their eyes and they were being just flooded with emotional feelings. And the feelings they described were, the way they interpreted those feelings was that like technology is bad. And the way we are developing and evolving our technology is going to destroy us, and we need to stop.
Yeah, that may be something that they had already heard, or just just a message. I had the sense, kind of going back to that experience, I had the sense that there was another agenda going on, but I didn't feel particularly threatened. But that was me. I already had gotten rid of most of my fear earlier on, out at the lab with Bob. So I didn't feel really threatened, but they were doing things to me. Yes, but it was, my kind of attitude was, that's interesting. Yeah. But I could see that if I didn't have that ability or that experience, that could be frightening. And once it gets frightening, then you start making up your own story and you start adding things to it, and you become a generator of the information that you're interpreting. So it kind of depends on the fear level of the individual. And I got kind of a message after that. It happened a few times, and I then made contact before I would go to sleep. I was making contact with these people, and I got the idea, you ought to just turn that off and ignore it. Stop with that. It's you don't need that. So I did. I cut that off. Like I say, on the web, you reach up and you click the X. You can close a portal if you want to. So you just close the portal, and now you don't hear that anymore. You don't get it.
Interesting.
So that's just one of the things you can learn to do.
So this larger consciousness that you speak of, that we all come from, is this God?
Well, that's an interesting thing. I never looked at it that way. It just turned out I was just following the logic of how consciousness evolved, and I ended up with this larger consciousness system. And about, 10, 15 years ago, I was giving a talk in the basement of a church, because that's a very cheap venue. And it was in Atlanta, Georgia. And I had 2 PhD theologians there, was the minister and the assistant minister. And the idea just hit me. So I stopped what I was saying. I was telling people sort of things I've told you. I was telling people the larger conscious system and so on. And I asked them, I said, well, you two are theologians, right? And they said, yes. And I said, tell me, what are the characteristics of God? Now, I don't want, dogma. I just want the fundamental characteristics. What are the attributes of God in general? And they did. They went and huddled and came back about 10 minutes later, and here was their list, and they had about 6, 7 things on there that was the attributes of God. Every one of them was an attribute of the larger consciousness system. And when I didn't expect that. I thought maybe 1 or 2 or 3 might be, but all of them were. And after that, I started thinking about it. Well, this model has also derived God. What is God? Where does it come from? Well, it's the larger consciousness system. It's the source of everything. Oh, yes, we are created in its image. We're little pieces that are the same piece of consciousness with memory and processing and whatever. We're virtual machines inside the larger machine, and it all kind of fell together. That's what most people talk about when they talk about God, functionally, the attributes. But now the larger conscious system isn't perfect. It's not supernatural. It's natural. It doesn't know everything all the time, but it can know everything, but it has to focus its intention. You know, it has to focus here or focus there. And if it focuses everywhere at once, then it doesn't get the fidelity that it does if it focuses various places. So it's a consciousness system. And then that says that it has all those same functions that we ascribe to God. Mm-hmm. So not only does this theory of everything do physics and do psychology and do metaphysics and do philosophy, but it also does theology. And that answers some of the big questions in theology. But, where's God come from? And how did that start and on? Well, it all goes back to that original cell of consciousness that could just be a 1 or a 0, and it evolved from that state. So, yes, and I've had any number of people that, this one lady, she was a nurse, and I can't remember where, in Colorado, I think, and she wrote to me, and she said, I am a very religious person. I consider myself to be very religious. I take religion very seriously, and I always have. And she went on to say, wherever I go now, I always carry 2 books with me, the Bible and my big toe. She says, I love your work because everything that was mysterious that I didn't understand, I understand it now, and it all makes perfect sense to me.
Interesting.
So I've had a number of people, and what I expected when I wrote the books is that the people who were very religious would not like my big toe very much. That they would, I'd find them on the negative side of that, but I haven't. Mostly, I've found people who are religious to think that it's a really good idea because suddenly all the things that they were taught have a scientific foundation under them rather than a mystical foundation under them. And it's the same with the paranormal stuff. Everything paranormal is easily, turned into logic and science. That's just the way consciousness works. Consciousness are netted.
So if the larger consciousness is God, that means we are all also God.
We're also pieces of that system.
We're God.
And we have all of its attributes, but at a smaller package. Okay? Well, think of the computer thing. You have the mainframe, and then you have 10,000 users, and each one of those users has a little bit of memory, a little bit of, a little bit of processing, and so on.
We're all pieces of it.
We're all pieces.
Right.
So we have the same general attributes of God. We are pieces of that larger conscious system, but we're in a smaller package. We don't have the capacity that it has, because it has the capacity to fit in all of us and everything else. But we have all the same things. We can evolve the quality of our consciousness to that same level of being love. So we can duplicate that. We're not limited other than in resources. We have limited resources. It doesn't seem to. It has limited resources too, but it's much bigger.
Well, the God of Christianity, capital G, they believe that Christians believe God is all-knowing, all omnipotent, which means God knows everything that's ever happened and that will ever happen, which means God knows the future, which means our stories are already written.
Yeah, no, see, I wouldn't agree with that. I would say that the larger conscious system knows most everything that has happened because it's all in that database that it collects on all the decisions and choices and so on. So it's got all that data collected, and it has omniscience in the sense that it can look at everything that's going on and why it's going on. So because we're pieces of it. The mainframe can look at all the users and what the users are doing and how they're doing it. The mainframe, it's just a piece of the mainframe. So the mainframe isn't locked out of that. They're just using a piece of that mainframe. So it's the same thing. So yes, the mainframe can know what's going on, but the future is not a done deal, because if the future is a done deal, then there are no choices. If there are no choices, there is no free will. If there is no free will, there's no consciousness. Consciousness, I define as awareness with a choice. That's it. Awareness with a choice. Free will is necessary for consciousness. If there are no choices, then there is nothing. There's no growth. There's no evolution. There's no change. Right. If it's all fixed, then there's nothing happening. It's the zero. It's the zero set. So there's no purpose to it. It's just done, finished. It's a so what.
Yeah.
There's nothing significant ever. And that doesn't build a system. You can't build a system out of that. So the idea that this is a deterministic. Now the physicists will like to say this is deterministic because they want to say that if I knew the state vector of every particle in the universe, I could compute everything that would happen from there on. But that's nonsense. It doesn't work like that. Physicists who want to believe that matter is at the bottom, even though their experiments tell them that they're not, they paint themselves in a corner. There's two logical positions that are totally opposite, and you can't mix them. One is that this is deterministic and materialistic. If it's materialistic, it has to be deterministic. Those two are a match set. They go together. On the opposite corner, philosophically, you have consciousness, time, and free will. Those three have to exist. If you take any one of them away, the other two can't make it. Consciousness needs choice. Conscious of what? Doing what? It has to have input. You have to have choice, this input or that input. You have to have choice. How do you interpret the data? So if you don't have choice, you don't have free will. If you don't have free will, there is no point in consciousness. Consciousness doesn't really exist. It's not, there's nothing to do. It's all been done.
Right.
So it's like I say, it's the zero. It's starting at zero. There's nothing. Nothing can change. Nothing can grow. Nothing can evolve. Nothing can ever be learned. It's just nothing. So that you can't make a system out of nothing doing nothing.
Right.
So I find that to be kind of an irrational space to be. The rational space is, yes, there is growth, there is change, there is time. If you have a choice, you have to have time before the choice, after the choice. So the physicists will have to tell you that this is deterministic, there is no free will, and there is no consciousness, and there is no time. All of those are imaginary things that we believe, but they're not true. And all of that's BS. What do you mean there's no time and there's no learning and there's that doesn't make any sense. That's because they misinterpret one of Einstein's equations. They get that, but there is time, there is free will, and there is choice. And that free will is kind of sacred in the world of consciousness. That's what, if you don't have free will, then again, you don't have anything.
Right.
So you need all three of those: time, choice, and awareness. All of those together have to be, as a set. Just like materialism and determinism have to go as a logical set. And you can't have one foot in this camp and one foot in that camp and still be rational.
Right.
To be rational, you have to be in this one, or at least consistent. You have to be in this one or that one, or you're logically inconsistent. So that's the choice. The zero set that does nothing goes nowhere, and the set that evolves and grows and creates, that's the set that is what I experience.
What happens when we die?
That's an easy question. I know that's the hard question, but that's really the easy question. And first, let me tell you how I know, because how do you know what happens when you die? Well, I know from several approaches. One, it's easy to do a mind-to-mind connection with somebody and then just follow along with them. So you see, hear, smell, and taste what they see, hear, smell, and taste. And it's just a mind-to-mind connection. What was it? Spock used to do that with the fingers on the head, right? He'd do a mind meld. Well, it's kind of like that. It's but not quite so showy.
You're tapping into somebody else.
You attach it into somebody else's mind.
Yeah.
So you're just an observer. You're sitting there observing what they're doing.
Right.
And I've done that 2 or 3 times with people as they died.
Whoa.
And you can just attach to them, and then you can go with them and see where it goes. And then you go through.
You were there while they died.
Yeah. You just attach to their consciousness. It's what you're attaching to, their consciousness. The body dies, the consciousness doesn't. So when they die, you're with their consciousness, and you can follow that process that they go through. And that's one way that I learned. The other way was that a long, long time ago, the larger conscious system gave me a job in the virtual reality frame I call the transition reality. And that's where you end up after your avatar dies. And it's there for a transition. And I was there just to learn what it was like. I was like a Walmart greeter. You know, the people would die and they would come there, and I would say, come off this way. It's fine. Everything's going to be all right. And I was doing that for a while, and I got around to the various places and stations. And so I spent probably, months where every night I had entities come to me when I was very young, like 7 years old. They taught me how to go out of body, and they taught me a lot of other things too, how to get around in the non-physical. So I had all that happen to me at a young age. And I had, non-physical friends forever. And I still do. Some of the ones I interacted with when I was 7, I still interact with them. So that's been a constant. But anyway, the system sent me to this transition reality so that I would understand what happens when you die. And I worked there for probably a month. Every night I'd lie down, and as soon as I hit the bed and shut my eye, I was gone, and I was there. And I did that every night until I learned everything that was there. So I've seen it from the death and the process and the transition, and then I've seen it from the other side where that transition comes to the transition reality and goes through the process of finding another avatar and going back
so
for
it's,
another
it's sort of
experience.
like the idea of reincarnation. So our consciousness gets shuttled into another avatar.
Yeah.
And born, like when a baby is born, does it enter?
Doesn't have to be when it's born. It can be, mostly it is before. Once the baby has sensory organs, it can see, it can hear, it can smell, it can taste, then that's when a consciousness can go there and see, hear, smell, and taste those things from those sensory organs. It can like log on to that because there's sensory data there to process. So that way the consciousness can hear the parents' voices, can hear music being played, can experience some, of what's coming, can pick up, it's intuitive, can pick up the feelings and the kind of ambience of the space that it's in. So there's a lot of things that it can do there. It gets a sense of feeling, a sense of space. It can punch mom in the belly, and do things that are fun. So yes, it often comes in before birth, just when it has sensory stuff. Before there's any sensory, there's no point. There's no input data. There's no data stream. So once there's a data stream, it can log on to that data stream.
Wow.
Now, sometimes it comes and logs on even after birth. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes something happens. There's some, one case I had a friend of mine had a family member who lived somewhere not around me or her, and they had a baby born with a brain cancer. So the baby was born, and they detected, I'm not sure how they detected, maybe they detected it in the ultrasound or something. It had some kind of lump in the brain that it shouldn't have had. So then when it was born, they examined that and found that it was some sort of a brain cancer. And when they discovered that, the entity that was going to be the consciousness logged onto that changed its mind and said, no, I don't want that. I don't want that want that experience. I don't want to be logged on to an infant with a brain cancer. Not what I had in mind. So they backed out. And the system was looking for somebody to pick that up. And I got invited in, I was invited by this friend to see what I could do. So I went to the babe, I saw the brain cancer, and I healed the brain cancer. And the brain cancer then disappeared. And another entity came, wasn't the first entity, but another entity came that was willing to take that on. And then the healing took place after that other entity came. And so it actually got a second, you want to call it consciousness, spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it. So the first one got replaced because it didn't back out. Now, that brings up a point is free will does not get run over. If you say no, if they say, well, do you want to take this body? You can say no, and they won't force you. You're not forced to do anything.
How do you know that happened? Like, how do you know that this entity entered the baby and then did a U-turn and left, and then something else came in?
Because when I log on, I look at the whole situation. When I get into it, I get there and I see what's going on, what happened. And I talk to the entity that was the baby then. I talked to that entity, that consciousness, and that consciousness was up in a whip because it didn't want that. And then I kind of asked the system, what do you want to do here? There seems to be a problem. And the system said, give me a moment. And I was, so I work all that out. Like if you came and told me that, my mother is ill, can I help? Don't just go and help with that problem. I have to go connect with your mother, find out what the problem is, why the problem is, where did it come from, why is she having that problem? And then I can decide whether I should heal it or not, because sometimes the problems people have are part of their learning experience. They need to have those problems. It gives them choices to have. So sometimes it's because they've had a lifetime of anger and stuff, and it's built up, negative stuff in the body is now expressing all that anger in terms of a cancer, in which case you don't mess with it. You say, no, I'll let that one be. It's what they need to experience. They need to experience the consequences of the way they've been. But other times I'll find out that, it's just, yes, this would be a good candidate to heal. That's a good idea. So I have to connect with everything before I decide what it is I'm going to do about it. And when I connected with this entity that was the consciousness for that baby, I found that it didn't want to be there. It didn't want to have a kind of a experience. So then they got somebody else, and I did the healing, and the cancer went away, and that little person is now probably an adult.
How do the doctors react to you healing the cancer?
They react to it like it's a miracle. So they saw it. They had tested it. It was cancer. They didn't know that before. They did a biopsy probably. And it just went away. Cancer does that sometimes.
Wow.
So, that was some years back. But this person, like I say, it was a family member of a good friend of mine. So they kept getting updates on it. So I was getting the updates on what was happening and what was going on.
When's the last time you had contact with this person, that baby who is probably now adult?
I never actually had physical contact with them. And after I did the healing, I butted out, I let it go. So it worked on its own way. But I did get a sense. I did talk to the entity that was coming in. And I told my friend that the entity coming in is really a high quality entity. It's one that didn't mind taking a risk of starting out with a brain cancer or whatever that might mean.
Wow.
Living the first bunch of years of your life in surgeries or, whatever else it might mean, or dying early.
Yeah.
So I told her what the kind of entity that it would be, and it turned out that was the kind of entity it was. So she reported back to me and said, yeah, she's really a special kid. So I've been doing these things all my life. It sounds like a wow, but it's kind of a everyday thing that I do, and I don't any longer have to go into a meditation state or do anything. Just do it. It's either I can tell you I never meditate anymore, or I can tell you I live in a meditation state. They're both equivalent. It's both the same thing. So
that's amazing, man. That's super fascinating just to hear your story and the way you live your life and the way you look at the world.
I got many, many stories.
I bet you do. I think
I generally don't tell them, though. I don't like to tell stories.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot more we can talk about, and I would love to do a part 2 to this podcast down the road. But we just did 3 hours, so thank you for your time. I'm very grateful for you coming here and doing this. Is there a place where people can go to get in touch with you or learn more about your work?
Sure. Yeah, there is several places. I have a website that is www.my-big-toe.com. They can go there and they can find, there it is. They can find a lot of information. And I've just skipped over the top here, kind of hitting some of the high points and skipping some others. And there's a lot more that I didn't say than I did say. But you can go there and get the gist of it pretty much from the website. If you're interested in doing paranormal, if you want to prove it to yourself, and I would suggest that you do that, because it's hypothetical and magical until you do it yourself, and then it's real after you do that. And I've got a course there that you can get it's an audio course. You just take it. Mm-hmm. It was a best of the best of audio courses that I did to teach people to do all the paranormal things. It'll teach you mind to mind. It'll teach you changing the probabilities. It'll teach you remote view, talk with dead people, all the things you might want to do. You can get a course there to do it. You can read my books. The books are a little hard to read for a lot of people, but if you read them very slowly, they'll make more sense. Now, besides that, I've got a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel has something like 1,500 videos. Wow. Most of those videos are 1 or 2 to 3 hours, so it's a tremendous amount of video that nobody would ever get through all of that. But I have 2 things to help you out. One is I have a search tool, which you can get to here in the website, that will search by subject through all of those 2,000 or 3,000 hours of video by subject, and it will give you a link that'll take you to just that 10 minutes in that video where I talk about that subject, and then it does them by order.
Oh, that's cool.
By order of significance. So you can really search through all the thousands of hours very efficiently by subject. And I have a specially trained AI called AI Guy, which is a character in my books. And AI Guy talks with my voice and is about 98% accurate. If you ask it things about my model and the things that are in the books and in the videos, he can ask it a question, and it's a very accurate AI. We took a normal AI and then we fed it the transcripts of all the videos that I've ever done, and we fed it the books, and we fed it everything basically that I've said. So it's got all of my material in its database, and it does a very accurate version of me. So if you'd like to ask me a question and you find that hard to do, go ask AI Guy, and he will tell you very closely the exact words that I would use.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's super impressive, man.
It's really very good. Yeah, I have a guy who does AI who figured this all out for me and made AI Guy, and then we tried to test it. They'd give me a lot of difficult questions that weren't just simple, but hard questions that you really had to understand to get it. And they gave me like 15 questions, and I'd answer them, and they'd tape all of that, and then they'd ask the AI the same, and then compare the answers between mine and the AI. And they were pretty much right on. There was very little differences. Occasionally the AI would say something that I didn't say because I just didn't think of it, but it did. And occasionally I would say something that it didn't think of, but I'd say about 98% it's like talking to me.
That's amazing, man.
So we can go do that. If you're interested in the science, you can go to the YouTube, find a playlist called Science or Science Trilogy, something like that, and you'll find a lot of me talking about the physics involved or the science of it. If that's something that interests you, go there. Some people are interested in science, some people are interested in the rest. If you're interested in the soft side of it, like how do I do better with my relationships? How do me and my significant other get along better? How do I raise my children? You will find the soft side of it in a lot of videos that I did with a couple of ladies where the soft side was their main interest. And I've got, 30, 40 videos there that are all about relationship and connections with people. It's the science of the subjective. You not only get a new science a more general science of the objective, a better physics, but you also get a science of the subjective that tells you, what it's all about and the right way to think of things to grow and to end up having good relationships. So you can get both sides there on YouTube. Okay. I tried to keep the science mostly in videos and YouTube because I didn't want too much science in my book. I wanted my books to be accessible to everybody. And all you have to do is say that there's physics in the book and nobody will pick it up.
Right.
So I tried to not do too much of that. And there's not much in the book. The books were written at a general level for everybody. You don't have to have any particular background to read them. The only thing I suggest is just read them very slowly. They're very, very dense, which is what makes them hard to read. You will probably find something that takes you 15 or 20 minutes to think about in almost every paragraph. So if you just kind of read over it, you're going to miss a lot of it. You have to read a paragraph and then think about how does this affect me? What is this saying about me and my life and my experience? And the reason I called it My Big Toe wasn't because I was so proud of it. It's my big toe. It was because it's derived from my own experience in the non-physical and as a physicist. And I tell people that it's just the launch pad for your own big toe. You cannot, you have to experience something before it's your truth. Right. It cannot be your truth if it's not your experience. If you read about it, it's somebody else's truth, not yours. And if you take on that experience that you read about it and say, well, that sounds good, well, now you're a believer in that truth. You don't want to believe. You want to not believe anything. Stay skeptical of everything so that your own big toe, the way you see the world, is based on your own experience. That's the way you have to go. So I'm not trying to sell you anything here as far as an attitude or a model or anything else. I'm trying to give you a framework in which you can build your own model of reality based on your own experience, which is why I gave courses on doing the paranormal, because people said, well, okay, I'd like to base it on my experience, so help me have experience of the paranormal. So I did. I put that course together for that reason, and it comes with a set of binaural beats that you can get separately. Binaural beats will put you into a mental space that's equivalent to somebody who's been meditating, say, for a decade. It just gives you that theta state where you're solid, and you keep that theta state from the beginning to the end, and then when the exercise is over, you're back without it. Yep. But that's what the binaural beat does. It kind of coaxes your EEG energy into the theta region and then keeps it there.
It's beautiful stuff, man. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it. And we'll make sure we link all that stuff below for people that want to learn more and find all your stuff. So thanks again.
Okay. You're welcome. Well, thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure.
Information is wonderful, but shared information is much better.
That's right.
That's your business. You're in the business of sharing information, and that's how we move forward in this reality. We have to connect and share. That's what's important.
I agree. And you're doing a great job. So thanks again.
And you're doing a great job. So.
I appreciate it. Good night, everybody.
Yeah, good night.